They left me there because they thought I was still afraid of them. My name is Allison Reed, but the people who actually loved me called me Allie. The last time my family saw me before everything collapsed, I was standing alone on a remote logging road in the Cascade foothills, 8 months pregnant, recently widowed, and trying not to let my knees give out beneath me. Fog moved between the pines like smoke. Rainwater slipped through the ditch behind me, carrying pine needles, gravel, and the corner of my purse, which my sister Harper had just thrown into the mud before climbing back into my father's black SUV. Inside that purse were my wallet, car keys, main phone, medical information, and the emergency contacts my doctor had begged me to keep close because I was so near my due date. Harper knew that. My mother, Vivian, knew that. My father, Grant Whitmore, knew that too, because he watched it happen through the rearview mirror and said nothing. Darius, my brother-in-law, looked back once with his face pale, like some part of him wanted to object, but fear had already trained him better than conscience ever could. Then the SUV rolled away. Its red taillights blurred in the fog until the mountains swallowed them completely. For a few seconds, I did not move. I wish I could tell you I was fearless, but my hands were shaking so badly, I had to press one against my coat. My throat tightened. My back ached. My daughter shifted heavily inside me, and for one awful heartbeat, I felt like a little girl again, standing in my parents' hallway, waiting for someone to notice I had been hurt. That was the thing about growing up as the scapegoat in the Whitmore family. You learned early that pain only mattered if Harper felt it first. If she cried, she was sensitive. If I cried, I was dramatic. If she broke something, she was overwhelmed. If I reacted, I was difficult. My father called it discipline. My mother called it keeping peace. A sharp kick pressed against my ribs, so sudden that I gasped. I placed my palm over my belly and closed my eyes. For 1 second, I heard Danny's voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me. You don't owe people access to you just because they share your blood. He had said that to me so many times during our marriage, usually after family dinners when I came home, quiet, ashamed, and pretending I was not hurt. Daniel Reed had been a firefighter and rescue paramedic, the kind of man who ran toward other people's worst days with steady hands and a soft voice. 6 months earlier, he died in the line of duty, leaving behind a half-painted nursery, a daughter he never got to meet, and a life insurance policy meant to keep us safe when he could not. My father saw that policy as a solution. My mother saw it as a family resource. Harper saw it as money I did not deserve. To them, Danny's death was not only a tragedy, it was an opportunity wrapped in sympathy cards and casseroles. I know, I whispered, rubbing the place where the baby had kicked. I'm still here. The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere far down the road, the engine noise faded until there was nothing left but rain dripping from branches. I could still hear Grant's voice from the SUV, smooth at first, then cold when I refused him. Sign the papers, help the family, stop being selfish, think of the baby, think of Danny. As if Danny would have wanted his death benefit used to prop up my father's collapsing real estate empire. As if my daughter's future was just another asset Grant Whitmore could leverage. I looked down at my watch. The second hand moved steadily around the face. 3:59. I waited, breathing through the ache in my ribs, through the fear, through the old instinct to apologize just to make the punishment stop. That instinct had kept me small for years. It had made me swallow insults, forgive theft, explain away cruelty, and call emotional starvation family loyalty. But grief had changed something in me. When you are carrying a child, you start asking yourself, which wounds are yours to endure, and which ones you are about to pass down. The minute changed. 4 o'clock exactly. For the first time all day, I smiled. Not because I was safe yet. I was not. Not because I was not afraid. I was terrified. I smiled because my father was punctual, arrogant, predictable, and arrogant people mistake control for intelligence. Grant believed that if he controlled this car, the road, the phones, and the money, then he controlled the truth. He believed leaving me without my purse meant leaving me without power. He believed a pregnant widow would crawl back before dark. That was his mistake. 6 months earlier, the morning after Danny's funeral, Vivian had hugged me in front of everyone from the firehouse and whispered, "Don't make any financial decisions without your father." That was when I understood my family was not gathering around me because I was grieving. They were circling because they smelled money. So I got quiet. I copied documents. I saved emails. I traced transfers through shell companies my father thought were invisible. I studied signatures that did not match, investor statements that did not reconcile, and corporate accounts that bled into private luxuries. I recorded every conversation I was legally allowed to record. I gave federal investigators 6 months of proof while my family congratulated themselves for underestimating me. They thought grief had made me weak. Really, grief had made me patient. Slowly, carefully, I bent as much as my belly allowed and reached toward my left shoe. Vivian had mocked those orthopedic shoes that morning, telling me pregnancy had destroyed my sense of style. Harper had laughed. None of them knew that one shoe had been modified. None of them knew what was hidden inside it. My fingers closed around the hidden satellite phone. The screen lit up in my palm. A signal bar flickered, disappeared, then returned. I held my breath until it locked. Then I pressed the emergency contact. Special Agent Mason Vale answered on the second ring. "Allie?" I stared down the empty road where my family had vanished, and my voice shook only once. "They did it," I said. "They left me exactly where we thought they would." There was a pause, then the sound of movement on his end. "Are you injured?" "No." "Was the baby moving?" "Yes." "Good. Stay where you are. We have your coordinates." I looked at the mud, the fog, the trees, and the purse my sister had thrown away. Then I looked toward the road where rescue headlights would appear any minute. My family thought they had abandoned a helpless pregnant widow in the woods. What they had actually done was give the federal government the final charge it needed. And before sunset, they were going to learn that I had never been alone. 3 days before my family abandoned me on that mountain road, my mother called and used the voice she saved for charity luncheons, fundraisers, and people she wanted to manipulate. Vivian Whitmore could make cruelty sound like concern if the lighting was soft enough. She told me the family was going to Black Pine Lodge for the weekend. Just a quiet retreat in the mountains. A chance to reconnect after everything we had all been through. She said I had been isolating myself since Danny died. She said grief could become dangerous when a woman closed herself off from people who loved her. She said the baby deserved to know the Whitmore side of her family before birth. Then she said the sentence she always used when she wanted me to stop thinking for myself. "Danny would have wanted us united, sweetheart." I was standing in the nursery when she said it, one hand resting on the white crib Danny had assembled 2 weeks before the fire that killed him. A folded yellow blanket sat on the rocking chair. His old fire department hung over the back, like he might come home, toss it on, and ask me what I wanted for dinner. My mother knew exactly where to press. She knew Danny was the wound that still opened if someone said his name gently enough. But I also knew Vivian. Healing had never interested her unless it photographed well. Family unity, in her language, meant obedience. Reconnection meant surrender, and that weekend had nothing to do with my daughter meeting the Whitmores. It had everything to do with the protected account holding Danny's life insurance money. The payout was $3.2 million. Danny had not been a rich man, but he had been careful. He had benefits through the department, private coverage we paid for even when money was tight, and a policy he insisted on increasing the day we found out I was pregnant. After he died, that money became the only solid ground beneath me. It was supposed to pay for our daughter's future, medical expenses, the mortgage, and every ordinary day Danny would not be there to help me carry. My father did not see ordinary days. Grant Whitmore saw collateral. By then, he had already called me 9 times about what he described as a temporary liquidity issue at Whitmore Ridge Capital. The first call came before Danny's dress uniform had even been returned from the funeral home. Grant never asked how I was sleeping. He never asked if the baby was healthy. He asked whether the insurance company had released the funds, whether I had spoken to an estate attorney, and whether I understood how important it was not to let outside advisors poison me against my own blood. I told Vivian I would think about the weekend. She gave a soft little sigh, the kind that made me feel 12 years old. You always make simple things so difficult, Allie. I stared at the crib and said nothing. That was one skill my family gave me. Silence. They mistook it for submission because they never understood the difference between being quiet and being empty. I was not empty. I was full of documents, recordings, dates, shell companies, suspicious transfers, and the kind of grief that had burned away my fear of disappointing them. So I agreed to go, not because I believed them, not because I wanted to make peace. I went because Agent Mason Vale and the federal prosecutors working with him believed Grant was close to forcing an overt act. They already had evidence of investor fraud, forged records, backdated agreements, and money moved through entities that existed mostly on paper. What they needed was something undeniable, showing that Grant was not merely desperate, but coercive. They needed to reveal the person he became when money said no. And Grant had always hated being told no. On Saturday morning, the black SUV pulled into my driveway. It was ridiculous for mountains polished like it belonged outside a hotel, not on wet roads lined with fir trees. Grant was driving. Vivian sat beside him in a cream coat and pearl earrings, looking like grief had been styled. Harper and Darius sat in the back. Harper wore oversized sunglasses even though the sky was gray. Darius gave me a tight nod when I climbed in, but he did not meet my eyes for long. No one mentioned that Danny should have been the one helping me buckle my seatbelt. No one mentioned that it was difficult for me to climb into the vehicle at 8 months pregnant. My father just watched the house in the mirror and said the neighborhood looked tired. That was Grant. He could turn any silence into judgment. Publicly, my father was beloved. Grant Whitmore built shopping centers, office parks, and luxury mixed-use developments. He donated to children's hospitals, sponsored charity golf tournaments, sat on boards, shook hands with mayors, and smiled in photographs. People called him visionary. They called him generous. They called him self-made, even though half his empire had been built on other people's money and the rest had been protected by lawyers who knew where not to look. Vivian completed the picture. She hosted fundraisers in pale silk dresses, posted family photos with captions about gratitude and legacy, and spoke softly enough that people mistook softness for kindness. She remembered birthdays, sent handwritten notes, and could wound you so cleanly you wondered if you had imagined the blood. Then there was Harper, the golden daughter, beautiful Harper, polished Harper, Harper with the perfect blonde waves, the perfect marriage, the perfect child, the perfect online life built around brunch, designer bags, and captions about hard work. She worked for my father in a role that was never clearly defined, because in our family, Harper's job was to be admired. Mine was to be useful, blamed, or absent. I had been labeled difficult long before I understood what difficult meant. Difficult meant I remembered things they wanted forgotten. Difficult meant I noticed when stories changed. Difficult meant I did not laugh when Harper was cruel. Difficult meant I asked where the money went. The first hour of the drive was almost peaceful, which should have warned me. Vivian asked about my blood pressure. Harper scrolled through her phone. Darius stared out the window. Grant talked about a new development outside Bellevue as if the investigation into his company did not exist, as if investors were not starting to call each other, as if vendors were not waiting on overdue payments, as if the accounts I had traced were not collapsing behind him one transfer at a time. He had always been good at sounding powerful inside burning rooms. Then the road narrowed and the cell service disappeared. Grant glanced at me in the mirror. Allison, we should talk before we get to the lodge. My pulse slowed, not because I was calm, but because I had been waiting. About what? About responsibility. Vivian turned slightly in her seat, her expression already mournful, as if she regretted the conversation she had helped plan. Grant kept his eyes on the road while he explained that Whitmore Ridge Capital was experiencing what he called a temporary timing gap between incoming funds and outgoing obligations. He said the market had shifted, lenders had become nervous, and good companies sometimes needed bridge collateral to survive unfair cycles. He said he had spent his life building something that would one day benefit all of us. He said family wealth had to be protected by family members willing to act like adults. Then he reached toward the console and handed Vivian a folder. She passed it back to me with both hands, like she was offering a prayer book. Inside Word documents I had already seen in earlier drafts: collateral authorization forms, trust amendments, consent letters, and a personal guarantee structured to place Danny's insurance payout within reach of Whitmore Ridge Capital and its related entities. The language had been softened since the first version. They had not made the trap less dangerous. They had only put flowers around it. I opened the folder and let my eyes move over the pages. If this is temporary, I said, why do you need my child's money? The temperature inside the SUV changed. Harper lowered her sunglasses. Here we go. Grant's hands tightened on the wheel. It is not your child's money. It is family capital that can be used responsibly. It came from Danny's death benefit, and Danny married into this family. I looked at Vivian. She did not flinch. My mother touched her pearls and said, "Your father kept a roof over your head. He gave you every advantage. The least you can do is help when your family needs you." Danny gave his life protecting people, I said. I am not using what he left behind to protect fraud. For the first time, Darius looked at me directly. Harper laughed once, sharp and ugly. You have always wanted to be the victim. Now you have money and a dead husband, so you finally get to play the tragic heroine full time. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. Not because Harper mattered, but because Danny did. Because he had been real and kind and warm, and the space where he should have been still ached every morning. I felt my daughter shift beneath the folder. My fingers curled around the edge of the papers, but I kept my voice even. Do not use him like that. Grant's voice dropped. You need to be very careful about accusing people of things you do not understand. I understand balance sheets. I understand investor distributions paid with new investor deposits. I understand fake consulting fees, recycled LLCs, and forged authorizations. Darius went still. Vivian's face hardened so quickly it almost startled me. That was the version of my mother most people never saw. The woman behind the lace curtains. The woman who could look at her own child with no love at all if that child threatened the image she had built. Harper leaned forward between the seats. "You've been snooping?" "I have been paying attention." Grant pulled off the main road so abruptly that my seatbelt locked across my chest. The SUV rolled onto a narrower logging road, tires crunching over gravel and wet leaves. Trees closed around us, fog thickened. My heart began to pound, but beneath the fear was something colder and steadier. He was doing it. He was becoming exactly who I needed him to become. He drove another mile before stopping. No one spoke for a moment. Rain tapped the roof. The engine idled. Grant took the folder from my lap, removed a pen from his jacket, and placed both in my hands. "Sign." "No." His jaw worked once. "Sign the papers, Allison." "No." Vivian whispered my name like a warning. Harper muttered something about me being insane. Darius rubbed both hands over his face. Grant turned in his seat. His eyes were no longer public eyes. They were home eyes. The eyes that had watched me cry at 18 after he and Vivian emptied my college fund and told me disappointment built character. "You are going to learn today that independence has consequences." I looked out at the empty road. "Grant," Darius said quietly, "this is too far." My father did not look at him. "Shut up." Then he unlocked the doors. "If you will not help this family, you can get out and walk until gratitude finds you. The nearest town is 15 miles back. Maybe the cold will improve your attitude." Vivian stared straight ahead. Harper smiled. For one final second, I waited for my mother to say my pregnancy mattered. I waited for her to say this was enough. I waited for some buried instinct inside her to recognize that I was her daughter, that my baby was her granddaughter, that leaving us on a mountain road was not discipline or family business. It was cruelty. She adjusted her glove and looked away. That was my answer. I opened the door and stepped out carefully. One hand braced against the frame, the other over my belly. Cold air rushed in. Mud swallowed the heel of my shoe. I turned back only long enough to see Harper grab my purse from beside me. "Let's see how independent you feel without a phone." She threw it into the ditch. The purse landed with a wet slap. Darius whispered my name, but he did not move. Vivian closed her eyes. Grant put the SUV in gear. As they drove away, I heard my mother's voice through the half-open window. "She'll come crawling back before dark." I stood in the road and watched them disappear into the fog, my coat damp, my stomach heavy, my hands shaking around the life they thought they had cornered. Vivian was right about one thing. I was going to make a phone call before dark. It just was not going to be to them. The second group of men entered without urgency. That was what made them terrifying. They did not rush through the conservatory like actors in a crime drama. They did not shout Preston's name or throw anyone against a table. They moved with the calm precision of people who knew the room was already theirs. Dark suits, plain expressions. Federal authority carried quietly. One of them spoke to the uniformed officer. Another approached the bank compliance representatives. The third scanned the room and found Preston with the kind of professional focus no amount of charm could soften. Preston saw it. So did everyone else. A wedding reception has many kinds of silence. There is the sweet silence before vows, the polite silence before a toast, the awkward silence after a joke fails. This was different. This was the silence of 500 people realizing they were no longer guests at a celebration. They were witnesses. Preston stepped backward, nearly bumping into the cake table. "This is absurd," he said. "You people have no idea what you're walking into." One of the federal agents looked at him. "Preston Hale?" Preston's chin lifted automatically. Even now, some rotten instinct inside him believed posture could become innocence. "I am," he said, "and I want my attorney." "That is your right." The agent's tone was so neutral, it seemed to anger him more than accusation would have. Conrad moved forward. "My son is a respected businessman. This is a misunderstanding triggered by a personal vendetta." The agent did not look impressed. Preston seized on it. "Exactly. Vivian has been unstable about this family for years. She works in distressed debt. She knows how to manipulate documents." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because even with federal agents standing 10 feet away, Preston's first instinct was still to place the debt in my hands. My father turned toward me as if remembering a weapon he had not yet fired. "Vivian is connected to Hale Properties," he said loudly. "She cannot stand there pretending innocence. She has ownership history. She has financial knowledge. If there are questions, she is part of them." There it was, the final reach, the drowning hand. Preston nodded quickly. "Yes, she was involved. She knows everything. She probably engineered this entire thing to take control." My mother's face brightened with desperate hope. "That is true. Vivian has always been entangled with the company." I looked at all three of them. For a moment, I saw us as we had always been. Preston in the center, collapsing something. My parents on either side, rearranging reality to keep him clean. Me standing close enough to be blamed. But this time, I had paper. I opened my purse and removed the black folder, the same folder Conrad had placed on my table like a death sentence. I held it up. "You mean these documents?" My father's face changed. "Not much." "Enough." I opened the folder and pulled out the notarized corporate resolution. My hands were steady. That felt like a miracle. "These were presented to me in front of this room less than 10 minutes ago," I said. "Signed by Conrad Hale, Marjorie Hale, and Preston Hale. They state that Preston is the sole operator, successor, and representative of Hale Properties. They also state that I hold no current management authority and have not participated in recent operational decisions." One of the agents extended a hand. I passed him a copy. "Not the original. Never the original. Mara would have been proud." The agent read silently. Judge Whitcomb watched with the faintest shift in expression. "Not surprised. Confirmation." I continued. "This morning, before the ceremony, my parents attempted to force me to sign documents that would have transferred my remaining non-managing interest and acknowledged vague historical obligations. I refused. They then created these documents to publicly remove me. Their own signatures confirm the control structure they are now trying to deny." Conrad's voice went hoarse. "You twisted this." "No," I said. "You notarized it." That landed like a glass dropped on marble. Marjorie understood first. I saw it move across her face, slow and sickening. The public humiliation she had designed for me had not made me smaller. It had made their control visible. It had given witnesses. It had fixed their story in writing before they could revise it. For the first time in my life, my mother looked at a document and realized cruelty could have legal consequences. "Vivian," she whispered. Not daughter, not sweetheart. Vivian. My name had never sounded better. Preston, however, was not finished. "Those papers don't mean anything," he said. "Family documents, symbolic documents. My parents were upset." The federal agent looked at him. "Mr. Hale, you can explain through counsel." "I don't need counsel to explain that my sister is insane." Amara flinched. It was the first time he had said something so nakedly ugly in front of her without polishing it first. she still held the red packet against her wedding dress. The paper had creased under her fingers. Her eyes were dry now, dry and devastated. "Was any of it true?" she asked. Preston turned to her, and for 1 second, the room disappeared for him. Not because he loved her enough to tell the truth, because he needed her most. "Baby," he said softly, "this is just pressure, business pressure. It looks worse than it is. The debt? Manageable. The valuations? Competitive. The escrow routing? Standard. My father's money?" He hesitated. That hesitation ended the marriage more cleanly than any confession could have. Amara looked down at her hand. At the ring. The diamond Preston had chosen was enormous, tasteful, but enormous. Another symbol, another borrowed promise made to glitter beneath other people's eyes. She touched it with her thumb. Preston saw the movement and panicked. He said, "Do not do that." She slid the ring off slowly. The whole room watched. My mother made a small sound, like an animal caught in a trap. Amara walked to the nearest table, picked up an untouched champagne glass, and dropped the ring inside. It struck the bottom with a clean, bright click. "I married the man you pretended to be," she said. "That man does not exist." Preston stared at the glass. Something in him broke. Not remorse. Remorse would have required a self he had never built. Control. He turned on me so fast, one of the agents moved. "You did this!" he shouted. "No," I said. "I stopped doing it for you." He lunged toward the side of the room, not at me, but toward the service corridor. The same path my father had told me to use when he ordered me to leave. There was a terrible poetry in that. Preston knocked over a chair. Waiters stepped back with a tray of champagne, glasses crashing across the floor. Guests screamed and scattered from his path. For all his polish, my brother ran like a man who had never believed consequences could catch up with him. Judge Whitcomb moved first, not dramatically, not foolishly. He simply stepped into Preston's path long enough to slow him. An old man, yes, but one with timing. Preston swerved, lost balance on spilled champagne, and slammed into the edge of a service table. 2 officers reached him before he could regain his footing. "Get off me," Preston yelled. "Do you know who I am?" No one answered. That was the cruelest answer of all. The cuffs went on in front of the ice sculpture. The Hale family crest glittered behind him while his wrists were pulled behind his back. Guests had their phones out now, openly recording. The broker at my table had his mouth hanging open. One of my mother's charity friends was crying into her napkin, though I suspected it was less from compassion than from the thrill of witnessing catastrophe too expensive to ignore. Preston twisted toward Amara. "Help me, please. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." Amara did not move. He looked at my parents next. "Dad, Mom, say something." Conrad opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Marjorie stepped forward once, then stopped when an agent turned toward her. For the first time, Preston was asking for rescue, and no one had a rescue left to perform. He looked at me last. That was the look I remembered most. Not the anger, not the fear, the expectation. Even then, handcuffed in front of 500 people, exposed by documents, abandoned by his bride, he still believed some part of me would fix it. That the old Vivian would step forward, pay the bill, smooth the lie, take the blame, save the golden son, because that was what the family system had trained me to do. I did not move. The agent began reading him his rights. Preston shouted over him, "She bought our debt! She planned this! She ruined my life!" "No," Amara said quietly. "Everyone heard her anyway. You ruined mine." That silenced him. For one moment, his face emptied. Then he was led toward the conservatory doors, past the flowers, past the cake, past the guests who had come to applaud his future and stayed to film his collapse. I watched him go. I had imagined once that a moment like this would feel like victory. That if Preston ever fell, if my parents ever saw him clearly, if the world ever stopped clapping for the lie, something inside me would rise and sing. It did not. It felt like watching a building collapse after everyone had ignored the cracks for years. Dust, shock, silence, a strange grief for something that had never been safe enough to love. My cheek still ached where my mother had slapped me. My purse held the black folder. Amara's ring sat at the bottom of a champagne glass. Marjorie turned toward me slowly. Her face had changed completely. The polish was gone. No society mother, no gracious hostess, no wounded saint, just rage with nowhere elegant to go. "You did this to us," she said. Her voice was low, almost private. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had taught me that love meant usefulness. The woman who had made abandonment feel like discipline. The woman who had handed me proof of my freedom because she thought it would break me. "No," I said. "I stopped doing it for you." Her mouth trembled. Conrad grabbed her arm, not tenderly, but because he needed something to hold upright. Across the room, compliance officers collected documents. Security moved guests away from the evidence packet. Judge Whitcomb stood beside Amara, one hand on her shoulder, while she stared at the ring in the champagne glass like it belonged to a stranger. I wanted to go to her. I did not. Some grief deserves privacy, even in a public ruin. Instead, I turned toward the conservatory windows. Outside, the ocean kept moving against the cliff, indifferent and endless. Behind me, my mother began to cry. Not beautifully this time. Not for me, not for Amara, for herself. But Preston still believed I would save him. Golden children always do. 24 hours after Preston was arrested, I went to see him. Not because he asked. He had asked, of course. Through my father first, then through my mother, then through a number I did not recognize that belonged, apparently, to a junior attorney who sounded far too nervous to be charging what Preston probably needed. I went because I wanted to know whether the fall had reached him yet. Not legally. Legally, I knew where things stood. The escrow bank had frozen the bridge facility. Judge Whitcomb had provided records to investigators. The compliance unit had preserved the routing instructions Preston submitted. Hale Properties was under review. My firm had already initiated the next phase of creditor action. The machinery had begun moving. What I did not know was whether Preston understood that this time there would be no soft landing. The federal holding facility in Providence looked nothing like my family's Newport estate. No white roses, no ocean view, no champagne flutes catching afternoon light. Just concrete, metal chairs, fluorescent lighting, and the particular smell of institutional cleaning products trying and failing to erase fear. A guard led me to a visitation room divided by thick glass. I sat first. For several minutes, I watched my own reflection in the glass and thought about the last time I had waited for Preston. I was 22, sitting in a financial aid office, trying not to cry while a woman explained repayment terms on loans my parents had already treated like family money. Preston had been late to pick me up. When he finally arrived in that silver sports car, he honked twice from the curb and complained that I looked depressing. Now I was 34, sitting across from an empty chair in a federal facility, waiting again. The door opened. Preston walked in wearing a gray jumpsuit. For one strange second, my mind rejected the image. Preston belonged in tailored suits, Italian shoes, expensive watches, hotel bars, charity photos, rooms arranged to believe him. Seeing him in jail clothes felt like watching a logo peeled off a counterfeit bag. He looked older, not humbled, just damaged. His jaw was unshaven. His hair, always so carefully cut and styled, had fallen forward over his forehead. There were shadows under his eyes, and one side of his mouth was slightly swollen, either from stress or from learning that arrogance had poor survival value in holding cells. But when he sat down and picked up the phone, his first words were exactly what they always were. "You need to fix this." No hello, no apology, no Vivian, I am scared. Just command. I picked up my phone on the other side of the glass. "No," I said. His eyes narrowed. "Do not start." I thought that was a complete answer. He leaned forward. "You made your point. Fine. Congratulations. You embarrassed me. You ruined the wedding. You turned Amara against me. Whatever sick little revenge fantasy you had, you got it. I did not turn Amara against you." He laughed, sharp and ugly. "Right. She magically decided to annul the marriage because she had a bad feeling. She decided because she read documents. She read your documents. She read debt records, escrow discrepancies, valuation comparisons, and notices tied to loans you failed to pay." His face tightened at the word failed. Preston could tolerate accusations of complexity. He could tolerate misunderstood. He could tolerate aggressive, ambitious, over-leveraged. Those words still allowed him to feel like a businessman. Failed was different. Failed was personal. He lowered his voice. "Listen to me. I need bond money. I need a real white-collar defense attorney, not whatever public defender they're trying to stick me with. I need someone who knows federal procedure, banking law, wire exposure, all of it." "You should hire one." "With what?" I let the silence answer. He stared at me through the glass. "Are you serious?" "Yes. You bought our debt. My firm acquired defaulted debt legally from a lender. You have money." "I do. I am your brother." I looked at him for a long moment. There it was. The magic word. Brother. Family. Blood. The emergency rope he had always expected me to throw, no matter how many times he had pushed me into the water first. "You signed documents yesterday," I said, confirming I was no longer family. "That was Mom's thing." "You signed them." "I was under pressure." "So was I." His face twisted. "Do you want me to rot in here? I want you to experience consequences without using me as a financial exit." He slammed his palm against the counter beneath the glass. Not hard enough to summon the guard. Hard enough to remind me he still thought force was language. "You do not understand what prison would do to me." I almost smiled, not from joy, from exhaustion. "Preston, I understand exactly what cages do to people." He blinked, thrown for a second. Then he recovered. "This is not some childhood grievance, Vivian. This is federal. This is serious." "Yes," I said. "That is why I warned Judge Whitcomb before the money moved." His nostrils flared. "You had no right." Amara had a right not to be tied to fraud. It was not fraud. What was it? A liquidity bridge, based on inflated collateral, a valuation difference, submitted through routing instructions the bank flagged, a misunderstanding, supported by forged documents. His mouth closed. There it was, a flicker, small but real, not remorse. Calculation. He was trying to determine what I knew, what prosecutors knew, and whether he could still make me afraid enough to blur the record. "You always hated me," he said. "No," I said. "I learned you." That hurt him more. He sat back slowly, eyes bright with anger and lack of sleep. "Amara filed for annulment," I said. His face changed before he could stop it. For once, the mask did not arrive fast enough. She would not do that. She did. No. Her father's counsel filed this morning fraudulent inducement, misrepresentation, financial deception. I am sure the language will get more elegant once they revise it. He looked away. I continued because he needed facts, not mercy. Judge Whitcomb has given records to investigators. The escrow bank froze the release. The federal review is expanding to Hale properties. Wedding videos are already everywhere. Your attempt to run is on at least 30 phones. His jaw worked. Mom will fix the social side. No, she will not. She always does. Not this. He looked back at me with a strange, almost childlike disbelief. That was when I understood something I had not understood before. Preston truly believed reputation was reality, not metaphorically, not strategically, deeply. He had spent his life surrounded by people who rewrote facts to preserve his image. To him, disgrace was not the result of wrongdoing. Disgrace was a public relations problem caused by insufficient loyalty. Dad said you can post bond, he said. Dad is wrong. He said you control accounts. I control creditor actions. Then stop them. No. Delay them. No. Vivian. I almost heard my mother in the way he said my name. The warning, the expectation, the insult hidden beneath familiarity. He leaned closer to the glass. Family protects family. I looked at him until he had to look away first. When I was 22, I said, I asked you why part of my loan money had gone toward your car. His brow furrowed, annoyed. You came here to talk about a car? You told me the market did not care about my feelings. You told me if I could not afford the game, I should not sit at the table. He rolled his eyes. We were kids. I was working 3 jobs. You were driving my debt. That is dramatic. No, I said. That is memory. For the first time, I reached into my bag. Preston watched with sudden hope. That was the saddest part. Even after everything, the movement of my hand toward my purse still meant rescue to him. Checkbook, card, signature, solution. I removed an envelope and slid it through the document slot beneath the glass. He snatched it. Inside was a copy of the $80,000 catering receipt from the rehearsal dinner. His expression shifted from confusion to fury. What is this? The last bill I paid for you. Are you kidding me? He stared at the receipt as if it had betrayed him. I paid for the dinner, I said. Your lawyer is your problem. His face reddened. You are heartless. There was a time that word would have sent me into a panic. I would have defended myself, listed every sacrifice, explained every wound, begged the person hurting me to admit I was not cruel for bleeding, not anymore. Heartless, I said quietly, is stepping over your sister when she is exhausted on the kitchen floor because your car payment mattered more than her future. He looked genuinely confused. That, more than anything, told me he had no idea who I was talking about. The sister he had used did not exist in his memory, except as a function, a resource, a bad mood, a jealous voice at the edge of his success. You think you won? He said. No. Yes, you do. You got Amara's family on your side. You got Mom and Dad scared. You got your little documents, but you are still alone, Vivian. There it was, the old knife, the one they had used whenever money, guilt, or duty failed. Alone. I looked around the visitation room. Concrete, glass, guards. The man who had been worshipped his whole life sitting in a gray jumpsuit, trying to convince me that my freedom was loneliness because his cage still needed company. I used to think that, I said. His eyes flickered. I used to think being outside this family meant being alone. Then I realized being inside it meant being collateral. He gripped the phone tighter. I stood. Panic broke through his anger. Wait. I looked down at him. Vivian, wait, please. It was the first time in my life I heard him beg, not perform distress, not manipulate sympathy, beg. For half a second, the old machinery inside me stirred. The trained instinct. Fix it. Smooth it. Do not let him suffer, because if Preston suffers, the whole family will punish you for it. Then I looked at the glass between us. I did not put it there. He did. Goodbye, Preston. His voice rose as I placed the phone back on its cradle. Vivian, do not walk away from me. I walked away. He shouted my name until the door closed behind me. In the hallway, the air felt different. Not clean exactly. Nothing about that place was clean, but lighter, as if some invisible account had finally been settled. That was the first time in my life I heard him beg and felt no instinct to fix it. I thought my parents would understand after that. Instead, they came to Manhattan and tried to sell me one last lie. 2 days after Preston asked me to save him from the consequences of being Preston, my parents came to Manhattan. They did not make an appointment. Of course they did not. People like Conrad and Marjorie Hale believed appointments were for people without names, without history, without the sort of entitlement that lets you walk into buildings and expect doors to remember you. My assistant called first. There are 2 people in the lobby claiming there is a family emergency, she said carefully. I was in my office reviewing a collateral recovery memo when she said it. Outside my windows, Manhattan moved in clean vertical lines of glass and steel. The city did not care about the Hale name. That was one of the reasons I loved it. What are their names? I asked, though I already knew. Conrad and Marjorie Hale. For a moment, I looked down at the memo in front of me. Commercial building, default status, asset condition, recovery timeline. My family had become a file. There was something almost peaceful about that. Send them up, I said, but have security stay on the floor. When the elevator doors opened, my parents stepped out, looking like the world had finally refused to flatter them. Marjorie wore the same pearl earrings from the wedding, but they looked wrong now, too polished against the exhaustion in her face. Her hair was pinned, but not perfectly. Her lipstick had bled slightly into the lines around her mouth. Conrad looked worse. His suit was expensive but wrinkled, and his eyes carried the red burn of a man who had not slept because reality had taken his keys. They walked past my assistant without greeting her. Conrad entered my office first. Marjorie followed, clutching her handbag as if someone might seize it at any second. I did not stand. That bothered them. Good. Vivian, my father said. No command yet, no insult. He was measuring the room, trying to find leverage. My office did not offer much. No family photographs, no Hale antiques, no framed charity programs with my mother's name printed in elegant script. Just books, files, 2 abstract paintings, a conference table, and a wall of windows overlooking a city where their social standing meant nothing. You should have called, I said. My mother laughed once, sharp and humorless. Our son is in federal custody. Our home is surrounded by legal notices, and you want to discuss etiquette? I want to discuss boundaries. Conrad stepped closer to my desk. You set us up. No. You bought the debt. Yes. You hid that from us. I had no obligation to inform defaulted borrowers of an acquisition before required notice. We are not borrowers, Marjorie snapped. We are your parents. On paper, I said, you are connected parties to a defaulted commercial portfolio. Her face twisted as if I had spit on the carpet. Conrad put both hands on the back of the chair in front of my desk. Marshals have restricted access to the Newport estate. Accounts are frozen. Vehicles are being inventoried. Business files are being reviewed. Do you understand what you have done? I understand what your signatures authorized over the years. You did this to punish us. I did this to stop being dragged into your punishments. Marjorie's voice rose. Your brother is alone in a cell. I looked at her. How strange to hear her discover loneliness only when Preston was the one experiencing it. He has counsel, I said. Not the right counsel, Conrad said. There it was. The reason. Not apology, not accountability, not Vivian, we hurt you. Not Vivian, you were right. Not even Vivian, what did Preston do? Money. Always money. My father lowered himself into the chair across from me. He did it heavily, as if the act of sitting were a concession. We need $200,000 immediately. I waited. For Preston's attorney, he continued. A real attorney. Someone who can manage the federal side, negotiate, control the narrative before this becomes worse. Before this becomes worse. The family motto. Never before someone gets hurt. Never before a crime is committed. Never before Vivian is asked to sign away liability in a locked room. Only before consequences become visible. No, I said. Marjorie stared. You cannot be serious. I am. He is your brother. He signed documents declaring I was no longer family. That was ceremonial, she said. It was notarized. Conrad leaned forward. This is not the time to be clever. I agree. That is why I am being clear. His hands tightened into fists. Preston will not survive prison. I looked at him then. Really looked. There had been a time when I would have wanted this. My father brought low in my office, asking for help. Not ordering, asking. I used to imagine that if he ever needed me badly enough, he would finally see me. He would understand the years I had spent carrying weight he called duty. He would kneel, maybe not physically, but emotionally, and say the words I had buried entire decades waiting to hear. I am sorry. You deserved better. We were wrong. Instead, he was here because Preston needed an expensive lawyer. The child inside me, the one who had once mistaken usefulness for love, went quiet forever. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and removed a black binder. Marjorie's eyes followed it. She recognized the color, maybe not the binder itself, but the feeling. Formal documents had become dangerous to her now. I placed it on the desk and turned it around. What is that? Conrad asked. The acquisition file. Neither of them moved. I opened the binder to the first tab. Hale Properties Debt Package. Purchased by my firm 3 months ago from the regional lender that no longer wanted exposure to your defaults. Approximately $20.4 million in outstanding principal, excluding fees, penalties, enforcement costs, and recovery expenses. My mother sat down slowly. For once, no one told her to. I turned a page. Cross-collateralized obligations. 2 commercial properties. Business accounts, certain vehicles, receivables, and because of the way Hale Properties pledged assets during your last restructuring, an interest connected to the Newport estate. Marjorie whispered, "You cannot take our home." I looked at her. I thought of the wedding lawn, the back row seat, the service entrance, the slap, the way she had used that house as proof that she had chosen correctly when she chose Preston over me again and again. I did not pledge it, I said. Hale Properties did. Conrad's voice went low. That estate has been in this family for decades, and apparently used as collateral for years. You have no right. I have creditor rights. He flinched at that, not because the words were loud, because they were true. For the first time in my life, the power between us was not emotional. It was contractual. It did not depend on whether they loved me, approved of me, believed me, or claimed me. It existed in black ink, signed agreements, default provisions, and security interests. They had spent decades telling me I owed the family everything. Now the family owed my firm, on paper. Marjorie looked at the binder as if it were alive. You would put your own parents out? You put yourselves there. We raised you. You used me. We loved you in our way. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny left. In your way, I said, meant taking my loan money for Preston's car. It meant letting me work unpaid in the company while he took credit. It meant calling me selfish whenever I stopped being useful. It meant asking me to sign a liability trap on his wedding morning. It meant disowning me in front of 500 guests because you thought shame would make me obedient. My mother's eyes filled with tears. This time, I did not trust them. You enjoyed it, I said softly. That is what I cannot forgive. Not the money, not even the favoritism. You enjoyed making me small. Conrad stood so abruptly the chair scraped backward. Enough! I looked up at him. Sit down or leave. His face darkened. Do not speak to me like that. This is my office. You are still my daughter. No, I said. You corrected that at the reception. Marjorie covered her mouth. Conrad looked at me with open hatred. There it was. The truth beneath duty, beneath legacy, beneath fatherhood. He had never wanted me as a daughter if I could not be controlled. You think this makes you powerful? He said. No. Power made this possible. This just makes it documented. He leaned over the desk. You listen to me. If Preston goes down, he will not go down alone. He knows things. Your name appears in old records. Do not think you are untouchable. There was the threat. Finally honest. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Yes? My assistant answered. Please ask security to come in. Conrad straightened. Marjorie grabbed his sleeve. Conrad. He shook her off. You are making a mistake, he said. No, I answered. I made those years ago. This is the correction. Security entered within seconds. 2 men, calm and professional. They did not touch my parents. They did not need to. I closed the binder. You can walk out quietly, I said, or you can be removed in front of my staff. I am offering you more dignity than you ever offered me. Marjorie stood unsteadily. For one moment, I thought she might say it. Not a full apology, maybe not even a clean one, but something human, something like regret. Instead, she looked at me with wet eyes and whispered, How could you do this to your mother? I felt nothing move inside me. Not guilt, not rage, not even pity. You should have asked yourself that question before asking me to become collateral for your son. Conrad took her arm, harder than necessary, and guided her toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. This is not over. I nodded. No, it is in recovery. He did not understand the joke, or maybe he did, and that was worse. Security escorted them to the elevator. My assistant avoided looking at them, which was kinder than they deserved. When the doors closed, my office became quiet again. I sat behind my desk and looked at the black binder. For years, my parents had told me I owed them everything. That morning, they finally learned the truth. On paper, they owed me, and then Amara walked into my office with an offer my family would have killed for. The moment the SUV disappeared, my body understood what my mind had refused to feel. I leaned one shoulder against the nearest tree and let myself shake. Not for long. 10 seconds, maybe 15. Long enough for the fear to move through me without taking over. The cold was sharper now that the engine heat was gone, and the quiet made it worse. It did not feel peaceful. It felt like the world was waiting to see what I would do next. I looked toward the ditch where my purse had landed. Part of me wanted to retrieve it, but the mud was deep and slick, and bending that far at 8 months pregnant was not something I could do safely on the side of a mountain road. Besides, my family had taken the obvious things because obvious things were all they had ever believed mattered: phone, keys, wallet, control. They had always confused access with power. My real emergency plan was inside my left shoe. Vivian had mocked those shoes before we left my house. She said they looked orthopedic, which they were. Harper said pregnancy had finally turned me into a grandmother. Grant told me I should try to maintain some dignity, even while grieving. They laughed because they thought the shoes made me look weak, swollen, unfashionable, and harmless. None of them knew that one shoe had been modified by someone far more careful than they were. I eased myself down against the tree, breathing through the pull in my lower back, and removed the shoe. My fingers were stiff from cold, so opening the hidden compartment took longer than it had during practice. For one terrible second, the latch stuck. My heart jumped so hard I felt it in my throat. "Come on," I whispered. The compartment opened. Inside was a satellite phone sealed in a waterproof sleeve. I pulled it free, powered it on, and watched the screen glow in my palm. One signal bar appeared, vanished, then appeared again. The trees were thick overhead. The fog seemed to press down from every direction. The device searched longer than it should have, and for a few seconds the old voice in my head whispered that I had been stupid, that I had trusted a plan too much, that my father would win because men like him always found ways to win. Then the signal locked. I pressed the emergency contact. Special Agent Mason Vale answered on the second ring. "Allie?" His voice was calm, but I heard the tension under it. "They did it," I said. "They left me exactly where we thought they would." "Are you injured?" "No." "Any bleeding? Contractions?" "No." "Is the baby moving?" "Yes. She kicked a few minutes ago." "Good. Stay where you are. We have your coordinates. Rescue is already moving." I closed my eyes and the relief hit so suddenly, I almost cried. Not because I was brave. I had not been brave in the way people imagine bravery. I had been terrified and angry and cold and heartbroken. I simply kept moving anyway because my daughter needed me to be more loyal to her future than I had ever been to my family's comfort. "Did you get the audio?" I asked. "We got it." "All of it?" "Allie, we heard the demand, the threat, the isolation, and the abandonment. We heard Harper take your purse. We heard Grant tell you to walk 15 miles. We heard Vivian refuse to intervene." I looked down the road, toward the fog where my family had disappeared. "What does that mean?" "It means they did not just threaten you. They isolated you, removed your access to help, and left you in dangerous conditions to force a financial signature. That changes everything." I pressed my free hand to my belly and nodded, even though he could not see me. Beneath my maternity sweater, a small transmitter rested against my skin. It had been placed carefully that morning, checked twice, and hidden beneath layers my mother had dismissed as frumpy. My family had never really looked at me. They saw a grieving widow. They saw a pregnant woman. They saw the daughter who had always been trained to absorb pain quietly. They did not see a witness. They did not see a forensic accountant. They did not see someone who had already handed their secrets to federal agents. 6 months earlier, I would not have believed I was capable of doing any of it. The day after Annie's funeral, our house was still full of flowers. There were casseroles in the refrigerator from people at the fire station, condolence cards stacked on the dining table, and muddy boot prints near the front door from firefighters who had come by because they did not know what else to do. I was sitting on the floor of the nursery, holding Danny's hoodie against my chest, when Vivian came in and closed the door behind her. She sat beside me without asking, wrapped one arm around my shoulders, and waited until I leaned into her. I hate admitting that. I was 34 years old, and I still wanted my mother in that moment. I wanted her to be soft. I wanted her to forget the rules of our family and simply hold me because I had lost my husband. For almost a minute, she did. Then she kissed my hair and whispered, "Don't make any financial decisions without your father." The words landed like ice water. I pulled back and looked at her. She smiled sadly, as if she had offered wisdom instead of a warning. Later that same afternoon, Grant asked whether Danny had maintained private life insurance in addition to departmental benefits. He said widows often made emotional mistakes. He said people might try to exploit me. He said the safest thing would be to let him review everything before I signed anything. That was when I understood they were not only grieving. Maybe some part of them was. Maybe Vivian liked the public tragedy of it. Maybe Grant enjoyed being praised for standing beside his widowed daughter. But under all of that, they were circling the money. At first, I only watched. Month 1 was suspicion. Grant emailed documents with vague names like emergency liquidity consent and temporary family collateral authorization. He said I did not need to worry about the language because lawyers had drafted everything. That was the first red flag. As a forensic accountant, I had spent years reading documents people hoped no one would read carefully. These forms were dressed up as family support, but the effect was clear. If I signed, Danny's insurance money could be pledged against obligations tied to Whitmore Ridge Capital and several related entities. The related entities bothered me most. Their names appeared in investor packets, loan schedules, and property acquisition summaries. But the timelines did not line up. Black Pine Equity Group received money for developments it did not own. Ridgewater Holdings paid consulting fees to companies with no employees. Evergreen Crest Management handled investor distributions even when underlying projects had not generated revenue. North Lantern Ventures appeared and disappeared across statements like a ghost wearing different clothes. So I started saving everything. Not dramatically, not like a movie. I made copies. I uploaded documents to secure storage. I printed the pages that mattered. I built spreadsheets late at night while my daughter shifted inside me, and the house stayed painfully quiet. Some nights I cried so hard I had to close the laptop. Other nights, I wore Danny's old sweatshirt and worked until sunrise because numbers were easier to face than grief. Month 2 gave me the first proof. Grant insisted I come to Sunday dinner because Vivian said the family was worried about me. I sat at their dining table while Harper complained about renovations. Vivian criticized how little makeup I wore, and Grant drank too much expensive wine. Darius arrived late, carrying a leather folder he kept too close to his body. He looked thinner than before, and when Grant asked him about pending distributions, his face tightened. I pretended to be exhausted. That part was easy because I was exhausted. I lowered my eyes, rubbed my belly, and let them think pregnancy and grief had made me dull. People reveal more around someone they do not respect. Grant and Harper started discussing investor capital as if it were a private family checking account. They talked about rolling funds forward, delaying recognition, and smoothing distributions until new commitments closed. Darius said one phrase I never forgot. "That only works if new money keeps coming in." Grant looked at him and smiled. "Then make sure it keeps coming in." That was the first time I had something more than suspicious paperwork. It was not enough by itself, but it confirmed the structure I had begun to see. New investor money was being used to pay earlier investors, cover personal expenses, and hide the fact that the projects were failing. It was not a rough patch. It was a machine built to eat trust. Month 3 was when I contacted Mason Vale. I knew him from a federal accounting case where my firm had assisted with damage tracing. I did not call the main office. I sent a careful message asking whether he still worked financial crimes and whether he could recommend the proper channel for a potential investment fraud matter involving someone close to me. He called me back the next morning. At first, he was cautious. He should have been. Family cases are messy. Accusations can be emotional. Documents can be misunderstood. He told me not to record anything illegally, not to provoke confrontations, not to put myself in danger, and not to confuse revenge with evidence. I almost ended the whole thing there. I remember sitting at my kitchen table after the call, staring at Danny's empty chair, wondering what kind of daughter turns her own parents over to the FBI. Then I opened an old box from the garage. Inside were papers from when I was 18, bank statements, college acceptance letters, a campus map I had folded and unfolded until the creases tore. 2 days before I was supposed to leave for my dream school, the account I had built by working grocery shifts, tutoring, cleaning offices, and babysitting on weekends was empty. More than $40,000 was gone. Grant and Vivian had forged my signature on withdrawal forms. When I confronted them, Vivian cried because I had embarrassed the family. Grant told me education was not a guarantee and Harper needed reliable transportation for appearances. The money bought Harper a convertible. I went to community college, worked nights, and told people I had changed my mind. That was easier than saying my parents stole my future and then demanded gratitude for letting me keep living under their roof. Looking at those papers, I realized the case against Grant had not begun with Danny's insurance money. It had begun years earlier, when my parents taught me that theft could wear the face of family. I became a forensic accountant because I wanted to understand exactly how people hide what they take. So, I called Agent Vale back. Month 4 and month 5 became a life lived in layers. On the surface, I was a grieving pregnant widow trying to survive doctor appointments, insurance paperwork, and a nursery that still smelled faintly of paint Danny had chosen. Underneath, I was building timelines, tracing wires, comparing signatures, mapping shell companies, saving voicemails, and attending family meetings with a recording device hidden beneath maternity clothes. Every time Vivian called me selfish, I documented the context. Every time Grant mentioned collateral, I saved the date. Every time Harper slipped and said something only someone inside the fraud would know, I wrote it down. It cost me more than I expected. Betrayal is not cleaner because you can prove it. Some nights, after sending another batch of documents through the secure channel, I sat on the floor beside the crib and apologized to Danny. "I'm sorry," I whispered once, holding his sweatshirt against my face. "I'm sorry this is what I have to do with the future you left us, but I promise I'm protecting her." The baby kicked then too. She was always answering me before she had a name. By month 6, the case had grown beyond my family drama. Federal investigators had investor statements, false valuations, forged authorizations, suspicious transfers, shell companies, tax issues, and internal communications. Prosecutors were preparing asset freezes. The state attorney general's office was involved. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marina Sloan had started reviewing charges. They had enough to move, but Grant was slippery. He kept his direct language limited. He let others sign. He used words like family, bridge, timing, and loyalty instead of fraud, pressure, and theft. Then Vivian invited me to Black Pine Lodge. Agent Vale did not like it. He told me more than once that I did not have to go. Marina Sloan said the existing evidence could still support charges. But I knew my father. I knew what refusal did to him. I knew if he believed he had me isolated in a car, away from my home, away from cell service, surrounded by people trained to obey him. He would stop performing. He would show himself. And he did. Now, standing beside that mountain road with the satellite phone in my hand, I heard the distant sound of an approaching engine. Not Grant's SUV. This one moved steadily, without hesitation. A dark, unmarked vehicle appeared through the fog and stopped a few yards away. Agent Vale stepped out first, wearing a dark jacket and the expression of a man who was relieved but trying not to show it too much. He wrapped a blanket around my shoulders before asking anything else. "You did what you came here to do," he said. That was when I finally cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears running down my face while I sat inside the warm vehicle and held both hands over my belly. Agent Vale did not tell me to stop. He did not tell me I was strong. He did not make my pain smaller by trying to decorate it. He simply waited. A few minutes later, he handed me a secure tablet. The final affidavit was already prepared with my location, the audio confirmation, the abandonment, the attempted coercion, and the seizure of my purse. My hands trembled as I read it. Signing my name should have felt like revenge. Instead, it felt like cutting the last rope between me and the people who raised me. I signed anyway, because blood had carried me into that family, but evidence was going to carry me out. While I was sitting in the back of an unmarked federal vehicle with a blanket around my shoulders and a signed affidavit on a secure tablet, my family was arriving at Black Pine Lodge like conquerors returning from battle. That was the part I had to imagine later. From recordings, witness statements, Darius's cooperation, and the pieces investigators pulled together. I was not there when they opened the front doors. I did not see Grant step onto the heated stone entryway and shake rain from his coat as if the mountain itself belonged to him. But I knew that house. I knew what it did to people like my father. Black Pine Lodge was not just a vacation property. It was Grant Whitmore's altar to himself. The lodge sat behind a long private drive cut through the forest. All dark timber, glass walls, and imported stone. The ceilings were high enough to make voices echo. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling so guests could look out over the pines and feel wealthy enough to own a view. There was a massive fireplace in the great room, a private wine room, a chef's kitchen Vivian rarely used except to stage photographs, and enough expensive furniture to convince visitors that success had a scent. Leather, smoke, polish, and money that had passed through too many hands before becoming decor. Grant loved bringing people there because every inch of it said he had won. What most people did not know was that Black Pine Lodge had been built with stolen investor money. Not directly, of course. Grant was too careful for that. Money moved through consulting fees, management contracts, reimbursements, private loans, and entities with names that sounded stable enough to put on a brochure. By the time it became stone, glass, and cedar beams, the theft looked like ownership. That was always my father's gift. He could make stolen things look earned. Grant walked into the great room first. Vivian followed, removing her gloves one finger at a time. Harper came in irritated, brushing imaginary dirt from her coat as if abandoning her pregnant sister had been inconvenient for her outfit. Darius entered last and closed the door behind him too softly. According to his later statement, that was the first moment the silence hit him. Not the silence of the forest, but the silence of a house where no one had said out loud what they had just done. Grant broke it by going straight to the wine room. "We all need to calm down," he said. Harper dropped onto the sofa and pulled off her sunglasses. "I'm calm." "You are never calm," Darius said. Harper looked at him. "Excuse me?" Vivian gave a warning glance, the kind she used whenever reality threatened to become visible. Not now. Grant returned with champagne, not because the moment deserved celebration, but because Grant believed expensive alcohol could turn any act of cruelty into strategy. He poured 4 glasses. Darius did not take his. Grant noticed and lifted one eyebrow, but he did not challenge him yet. Control, to my father, was a performance. He liked to begin softly when he still believed everyone would remember their roles. 2 hard decisions, Grant said, raising his glass, to family discipline and to protecting the Whitmore legacy. Vivian touched her glass to his. Allison has always needed consequences. Harper laughed. She's probably crying into a tree right now. Darius stared at the champagne bubbles rising in his untouched glass. She's 8 months pregnant, he said. The room cooled around him. Grant sipped before answering. She is also an adult. We left her on a logging road. She chose to get out. You told her to get out? I gave her a choice. No, you didn't. You demanded she sign documents, and when she refused, you left her without transportation. Harper rolled her eyes. God, Darius, spare us the courtroom voice. That line mattered more than Harper understood. Courtroom voice. Even she knew, somewhere under the entitlement, that what happened in the SUV sounded bad when spoken plainly. That was the problem with families like mine. Their abuse survived by staying wrapped in private language. Lesson, loyalty, respect, discipline, sacrifice. Once you translated those words into what they actually meant, the whole thing started to rot in daylight. Darius turned toward her. You threw her purse into a ditch. Harper's expression flickered. Vivian put down her glass slowly. Harper did what she felt was necessary in a tense moment. She took Allie's phone. She would have used it to create drama, Harper snapped. Darius gave a humorless laugh. She can't create anything. She can't call anyone. That was the point, wasn't it? For the first time since they entered the lodge, no one had an immediate answer. Grant moved to the fireplace and pressed a button. Flames rose behind the glass, controlled and clean, nothing like the fires Danny had walked into. My father stood before them as if heat could restore authority. Darius, he said, you are emotional. That is understandable, but do not confuse discomfort with wrongdoing. Darius looked at him. What would you call it? I would call it forcing Allison to face the consequences of betrayal. Betrayal? Darius asked. She refused to hand over her dead husband's insurance money. Grant's jaw tightened. That money could protect this company. It could protect her child. Harper stood suddenly. Oh, please, do not pretend you care about Allie's baby. You care because you're scared. Darius looked at his wife, and for once, he did not back down quickly enough to satisfy her. Maybe I should be. Harper's face changed. That polished golden child mask slipped, and underneath it was the panic of someone who had never learned the difference between being loved and being indulged. You wanted this life too, she said. You wanted the suits, the cars, the house, the photos, the private school for Caleb, the club membership, the invitations. Don't stand here acting like you suddenly grew a conscience because Allison made sad eyes in the back seat. Darius flinched because she was not entirely wrong. He had benefited. That was the ugly truth that made him useful later, but not innocent. Darius had an education, a finance background, and enough intelligence to know the numbers at Whitmore Ridge Capital did not make sense. Grant had made him CFO on paper because his credentials looked clean. Darius signed what he was told to sign, sat in meetings, reassured lenders, and accepted a lifestyle he had not earned. He was trapped, yes, but the cage had velvet cushions. And for years, he had chosen not to ask who paid for them. Grant stepped closer to him. Everything you are, I helped make possible. Darius swallowed. I know. No, I do not think you do. Before Harper, you were a junior analyst with student debt and ambition bigger than your resume. I gave you a title, I gave you access, I gave you a name people respected. You used my name. I elevated your name. You put my signature on entities I didn't control. Grant smiled without warmth. A CFO who complains about responsibility is an unemployed bookkeeper. There it was, the leash. Grant rarely used open threats when subtle humiliation would do. Darius looked toward Vivian, maybe expecting her to soften the moment. She did not. Vivian was near the windows now, checking her phone, more concerned with the signal than the moral temperature of the room. We have the hospital gala next month, she said. If Allison tries to turn this into some public grief episode, we need to get ahead of it. Darius stared at her. That is what you're worried about? Vivian looked up, offended by his tone. I am worried about this family's reputation. You left your pregnant daughter in the woods. Vivian's face tightened, but her voice stayed soft. That was her most dangerous trick. My daughter has been unstable since Daniel died. Everyone knows grief can distort reality. If she makes accusations, people will understand she needs care, not attention. Harper nodded quickly, relieved to have a script. Exactly. We say she's hormonal and overwhelmed. We say we tried to help her, but she lashed out. Grant pointed toward Harper with his glass. No public statements without Leonard. Leonard Hayes was the family attorney, or at least he had been for years. He was expensive, discreet, and very good at turning ugly things into neutral phrases. My father trusted him the way some people trust priests. Leonard knew where the documents were buried, but as it turned out, he did not know where all the bodies were. Darius moved to the window and looked down the driveway. Fog had swallowed the road beyond the gate. What if she doesn't come crawling back? Grant laughed, not loudly, just enough to tell everyone the question bored him. Allison has spent her entire life afraid of being cast out. She will come back. And if she doesn't? She has no phone. Darius turned. Grant continued. She has no keys, no transportation, no witnesses, no proof of anything except her own tendency toward hysteria. She has us, Darius said. We were witnesses. Harper made a disgusted sound. You are not a witness against your own family. That sentence sat in the air like a curse. Your own family. The words had been used against me my whole life, but now they turned toward Darius. He understood then, I think, that family was not a shelter in that house. It was a weapon passed around the room until everyone had fingerprints on it. Vivian stepped closer to him, her expression gentle enough to frighten anyone who knew her. Darius, Caleb needs stability. Harper needs stability. This is not the time for moral confusion. He looked at her. Do not bring my son into this. Vivian's eyebrows lifted slightly. Then stop behaving in ways that could harm him. That was when Darius realized what I had realized years earlier. Vivian did not have to shout to threaten you. She simply placed something you loved on the table and let you imagine what might happen to it if you disobeyed. Grant checked his watch, then turned toward the television mounted above the low cabinet opposite the fireplace. Enough, the game is about to start. It sounds absurd, but that was part of why the timing worked. My father was a man of habits. Sunday football, expensive bourbon, market calls before breakfast, investor updates on Wednesdays, family dinners when optics required them. He believed routines proved control. He never considered that predictability could become evidence. He always watched the same pre-game broadcast at Black Pine Lodge because it made him feel normal, powerful, untouched. I knew that because I had grown up arranging myself around his moods and rituals. Vivian sat beside Harper on the sofa. Harper opened her phone again, probably expecting service to return, probably preparing a post about mountain weekends and family healing. Darius remained near the window. Grant turned up the volume and settled into his leather chair with the confidence of a man who believed a frightened daughter was walking through the cold towards surrender. On the screen, commentators laughed under bright studio lights. Graphics moved, music swelled, men in suits argued cheerfully about quarterbacks and playoff chances while, on another part of the mountain, federal agents were securing my statement and preparing the next step of an operation my family had not even imagined. Darius said one more time, "Quieter now. We should go back." Grant did not look away from the screen. "Sit down. She could go into labor." "She will not. You do not know that." "I know, Allison. Fear makes her obedient." That was the sentence Darius later said stayed with him. Not because it was the cruelest thing Grant had ever said, but because it was so certain. My father did not say fear might make me obedient. He said it as a fact, like he was describing weather, interest rates, or a locked door. That was how he saw me, not as a person making choices, but as a system he had engineered. The football broadcast stuttered. Grant frowned and lifted the remote. "What now?" The studio image froze for half a second, then vanished beneath a red banner. Breaking news. Vivian sat straighter. Harper looked up from her phone. Darius stopped breathing. Grant lowered the remote slowly. The screen cut to the state capitol. A row of flags stood behind a podium. Reporters shifted in the background. At first, no one in the room at Black Pine Lodge spoke, because the human mind protects itself from recognition for as long as it can. Then State Attorney General Dana Hollis stepped to the microphones, and beside her stood federal officials, prosecutors, and a man Darius would later identify from news coverage as belonging to the FBI Financial Crimes Division. Vivian's champagne glass trembled once in her hand. Grant said, "This has nothing to do with us." But his voice was not strong anymore. Dana Hollis looked directly into the cameras. "This afternoon, my office, in coordination with federal prosecutors and the FBI Financial Crimes Division, executed a major action against a real estate investment fraud scheme operating through multiple entities across this state." Harper whispered, "Dad?" Grant snapped, "Quiet." On the screen, Dana Hollis continued, "The total exposure is currently estimated at more than $50 million. Darius turned away from the window at last. Grant stood. Then the camera angle widened, and my family saw me step into frame beside the podium in a navy maternity blazer, pale but upright, one hand resting lightly over my belly. Harper's mouth fell open. "No," she whispered. "No. We just left her on the mountain." Darius looked at Grant with something like horror and recognition mixed together. "She was recording us," he said. And for the first time in his life, my father had no one in the room afraid enough to answer for him. On the television screen inside Black Pine Lodge, State Attorney General Dana Hollis stood behind the podium with the calm confidence of someone who had not come to ask questions. She had come to announce consequences. The room behind her was bright, official, and crowded with reporters. Flags stood in a row. Microphones from local stations and national outlets filled the podium. Beside her were representatives from the FBI Financial Crimes Division, federal prosecutors, and investigators whose faces revealed nothing. To anyone watching casually, it was another white-collar crime announcement. To my family, it was the moment the walls began moving inward. Dana Hollis adjusted the papers in front of her and looked into the cameras. This afternoon, my office, in coordination with the FBI Financial Crimes Division and federal prosecutors, took action against a real estate investment fraud scheme operating through multiple corporate entities across this state. Grant stood in front of the television, one hand still holding the remote. He did not sit down. Vivian had gone completely still on the sofa, her champagne glass resting untouched between both hands. Harper was frozen beside her, phone in her lap, mouth slightly open. Darius stood by the window with his face drained of color, because unlike Harper, he understood the language being used. Coordination, federal prosecutors, multiple corporate entities. Those were not words used for rumors or family arguments. Those were words used when investigators had already done the work. Dana continued, based on current filings and investigative findings, the total exposure is estimated at more than $50 million. Investors were led to believe their funds were being used for commercial developments, land acquisitions, and managed real estate projects. In reality, substantial portions of that money were moved through layered shell companies used to pay prior investors, cover luxury expenses, conceal shortfalls, and enrich individuals connected to the scheme. Harper looked at Grant. Dad, is this about us? Grant turned so sharply she flinched. No, but the word came too fast. Vivian set the champagne glass down with care, as if one wrong movement might make the broadcast more real. There are hundreds of developers in this state, Grant said. This is political theater. It could be anyone. Darius did not look away from the screen. She said layered shell companies. Grant's eyes flicked toward him. Do not start. She said investor money was used to pay prior investors. Darius, that is exactly... On the screen, Dana Hollis paused while cameras clicked. Then she said the sentence that changed the air in the lodge completely. This investigation was made possible in part by an insider who came forward at great personal risk. The camera shifted. I stepped into frame beside the podium. I will never forget watching that footage later, not because I looked powerful, but because I looked exhausted and still refused to disappear. I was wearing a Navy maternity blazer Agent Vale had kept in the vehicle for me because we had discussed the possibility of a statement if the operation moved that day. My hair was neat enough, my face was pale. One hand rested over my belly, partly out of instinct and partly because my daughter had been moving non-stop since I left the mountain road. I did not look like the hysterical widow Vivian had planned to describe. I looked tired, pregnant, grieving, and very much alive. Inside Black Pine Lodge, Harper whispered. No, Darius said. She was recording us. Grant did not speak. Vivian's face changed first, not into guilt, not into concern, into calculation. Her eyes moved over my image on the screen, measuring my posture, my clothes, my expression, already trying to decide whether the world would believe her if she called me unstable. That was my mother's gift. Even in disaster, she looked for the angle. Dana Hollis turned slightly toward me. The whistleblower is a certified forensic accountant who documented records, communications, and financial pathways over several months while facing pressure from individuals connected to the companies under investigation. I stepped to the microphone. The lights were bright enough to make my eyes burn. Agent Vale stood just out of frame. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marina Sloan was nearby, expression unreadable, arms folded, waiting to see if I could do what I had agreed to do. No one forced me to speak. They told me I did not have to. But I wanted my family to hear the truth in my voice before lawyers got paid to bury it under neutral words. My name is Allison Reed, I said. For 6 months, I provided investigators with documents, recordings, account records, investor materials, and internal communications related to Whitmore Ridge Capital and associated entities. At the lodge, Harper stood so abruptly that her phone fell from her lap onto the rug. She named it. Grant's hand tightened around the remote. I continued. The entities under review include Black Pine Equity Group, Ridgewater Holdings, Evergreen Crest Management, North Lantern Ventures, and additional related companies used to move, disguise, and redirect investor funds. Darius covered his mouth with one hand. He knew those names. His signature was on documents for most of them. Some he had signed because Grant told him they were routine. Some he had signed after asking questions and being humiliated for asking. Some he had signed because he liked the house, the cars, the private school, the photographs, and the life that made him look more successful than he felt. He was guilty. He was also beginning to understand he had been useful in the exact way a shield is useful. Grant turned toward him. You did this. Darius stared at him. What? You talked to her. I didn't. You must have. She has names she could not have gotten alone. That was almost funny in the cruel way my father often was. Even while watching me expose him as a forensic accountant, he still could not imagine that I had figured it out myself. In his mind, knowledge had to come from a man. Power had to be handed down. Evidence had to be stolen from someone who mattered. Darius lowered his hand. She traces money for a living, Grant. Harper spun toward her husband. Do not defend her. I'm not defending her. I'm telling you, we are in serious trouble. Vivian rose from the sofa. No, we are not going to panic. We are going to call Leonard. Grant seemed to wake up at the name. He grabbed his phone and started scrolling. On the television, I was still speaking. But inside the lodge, the first fracture had opened, and everyone was trying to step away from the blame before it touched them. Grant put the phone to his ear. Leonard, turn on the news. Now. There was a pause. Yes, that press conference. I want an immediate statement. Defamation. Injunction. Gag order. I want every outlet notified that Allison Reed is emotionally unstable and acting out of grief. Another pause. Grant's expression tightened. What do you mean, don't talk? Vivian moved closer to him, whispering, Put him on speaker. Grant ignored her. No, you listen to me. This is a coordinated attack. She has been unstable since Daniel died. She is pregnant. Emotional, easily influenced. I want a statement drafted in the next 10 minutes. Darius laughed once quietly. Grant pointed at him without looking. Shut up. On the other end of the call, Leonard Hayes must have said something that finally cut through my father's rage, because Grant stopped pacing. His shoulders stiffened. The lodge went silent around him. What do you mean your firm has withdrawn? Vivian's lips parted. Harper said, Withdrawn from what? Grant turned away from them. You cannot withdraw. You represent the company. He listened. Then his face changed. People think powerful men always break loudly. Sometimes they break in inches. A pause, a blink, a loss of color around the mouth. Grant Whitmore had spent decades treating attorneys like weapons he rented by the hour. Hearing one step away from him, while the cameras were still rolling, must have felt like discovering the floor had never been there. What accounts? Grant asked. Darius closed his eyes. Vivian whispered, Grant? Grant lowered the phone slightly, then raised it again. No, that is impossible. Those accounts are operating accounts. Leonard spoke long enough for the answer to become obvious. Frozen. Corporate accounts frozen. Personal accounts frozen. Credit lines revoked. Offshore transfers flagged. Properties under review. Related entities seized or restrained. Grant's invisible machinery was becoming visible all at once, and visibility was fatal to men like him. Harper picked up her phone and began tapping frantically. My card was declined. No one answered her. She tapped again. Why is my card declined? Darius looked at her with something like pity. Because the money wasn't real. Harper's face twisted. Do not talk to me like that. He looked toward the television, where Dana Hollis had returned to the microphone and was explaining that warrants were being executed and additional enforcement actions were underway. You still don't understand, Darius said. This isn't a family scandal. This is federal. Vivian turned on him. You knew enough to sign. The accusation landed exactly where she meant it to. Darius stepped back as if struck. Harper stared at her mother, then at him, realization arriving slowly and selfishly. What does that mean? Grant ended the call without saying goodbye. For a moment, he stood before the fireplace, silent. The flames moved behind him, clean and contained, while everything else burned. Vivian demanded, What did Leonard say? Grant's voice was flat. He says we should not contact him again without independent counsel. Harper blinked. What does that even mean? Darius answered before Grant could. It means he's protecting himself. Harper turned on Grant. You said everything was handled. It is handled. Dad, my card was declined. Grant snapped. No one cares about your card. That was the first time I think Harper understood she was not the center of the crisis. Her face crumpled, not with remorse, but with offense. She had spent her entire life being protected from consequences by becoming the loudest emergency in the room. Now, there was an emergency too large to orbit her. On the television, a reporter asked Dana Hollis whether arrests were expected. Dana did not smile. Enforcement actions are ongoing. I cannot comment beyond the public filings at this time. Grant lunged for the remote and muted the television. The sudden silence was worse than the broadcast. Vivian drew herself up. We need a plan. Darius looked at her. You mean a story. We need unity. No, Vivian, you need everyone saying the same lie. Harper shoved him. Don't speak to my mother that way. Darius caught her wrist before she could shove him again. Your mother just reminded me I signed enough documents to go to prison. Harper yanked free. Then maybe you should have been smarter. That was when Darius finally said what had been building inside him since the logging road. You knew. Harper went still. Grant's eyes narrowed. Darius looked at his wife, not Grant. You knew he was putting my name on things. You knew I was the one on paper. Harper's lips pressed together. I knew you had a job. No, you knew I was useful. Vivian's voice sharpened. This is not the time for marital drama. Darius turned on her. You left Allie in the woods and came back here to drink champagne. Do not lecture me about drama. Harper slapped him. The sound cracked through the great room. For 1 second, everyone froze. Then Darius looked back at her slowly, his cheek reddening, and the last piece of his obedience seemed to fall away. I'm calling the police. Grant stepped forward. You will do no such thing. Darius reached for his phone. Harper lunged for it. The fight that followed was not graceful. It was not cinematic. It was ugly, desperate, and small. Harper grabbed at Darius's arm. Vivian shouted at both of them to stop embarrassing themselves. Grant tried to take the phone, barking orders like volume could restore authority. Darius shoved past him. Harper slipped on spilled champagne and knocked into the side table. A tall ceramic vase Vivian had imported from Italy tipped, hit the stone floor, and shattered. That sound, Darius later said, felt like the family image breaking in real time. Vivian stared at the pieces. Do you have any idea what that cost? Darius looked at the broken vase, then at her. Do you? No one answered. Then Grant's phone rang. Every face turned toward it. For a brief, irrational moment, they all seemed to hope it was Leonard calling back with a solution. Grant checked the screen, frowned, and answered. "What?" He listened. His eyes moved slowly toward the front windows. Vivian whispered, "Who is it?" Grant did not answer her. His face had gone gray. From the phone, Leonard Hayes' voice was faint but clear enough for Darius to hear one sentence. "If I were you, Grant, I would look out the front window." Grant lowered the phone. For the first time all afternoon, he looked afraid. He walked to the glass wall facing the driveway. Vivian followed. Harper stood behind them, breathing hard. Darius remained near the broken vase, still holding his phone. Outside, fog moved between the trees. Then red and blue lights appeared at the end of the drive, flashing through the mist, growing brighter as vehicle after vehicle climbed toward Black Pine Lodge. The lights reached the gate first, flashing red and blue against the wet trunks of the pines. Then the vehicles appeared one after another, dark federal SUVs followed by state police cruisers, moving slowly up the private drive like the mountain itself had finally decided to answer. Inside Black Pine Lodge, no one moved for several seconds. Grant stood in front of the windows with his phone still hanging from one hand. Vivian had both palms pressed together beneath her chin, not praying exactly, but arranging herself into the image of a woman who might be photographed in distress. Harper backed away from the glass, as if distance could make the lights less real. Darius looked at the broken vase on the floor, then at the driveway, and I think that was the moment he understood there would be no private version of the truth anymore. The lead vehicle stopped near the front entrance. Doors opened with controlled efficiency. Agents stepped out in dark jackets. State police took positions along the drive and near the rear access path. No one stormed the house like an action movie. No one needed to. Black Pine Lodge was isolated, surrounded by trees, and every exit had already been accounted for. Grant had built the property to feel untouchable. That afternoon, its privacy became a cage. A voice came through a speaker from outside. "Federal search warrant? Everyone inside? Come out with your hands visible." Vivian whispered, "Grant, do something." Grant did not answer. The voice repeated, firmer this time. "Everyone inside, come out with your hands visible." Darius moved first. He lifted both hands slowly and walked toward the front door. Harper grabbed his sleeve. "Where are you going?" He looked down at her hand until she let go. "Out! You coward!" "No," he said quietly. "Just finished being stupid." He opened the door before Grant could stop him. Cold air swept into the foyer, carrying the smell of rain, mud, and exhaust. Darius stepped onto the porch with his hands raised, his face wet, before anyone could tell whether it was rain or tears. Agents ordered him forward, secured him, and guided him toward one of the vehicles. He did not resist. He kept saying the same thing. "I want to cooperate." Grant came out next, but he tried to make even surrender look like negotiation. His hands were raised, but not high enough. His chin stayed lifted. He looked at the agents like contractors who had arrived without an appointment. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said. An agent told him to turn around. Grant smiled tightly. "I am happy to speak with whoever is in charge." "Turn around." The smile disappeared. For 1 second, the old Grant flashed through, insulted that the world had stopped accepting his tone as currency. Then he turned. They cuffed him on the driveway he had once bragged cost more than most people's houses. Vivian followed after him, moving carefully, as if the porch were a stage and she still had an audience to convince. She had pulled her coat around her shoulders and loosened her hair slightly, just enough to look shaken. Tears ran down her cheeks, but Vivian could cry on command. I had learned that before I learned multiplication. She looked at the agents and spoke in a trembling voice. "My daughter needs help. She is confused. She has been through a terrible loss." No one responded. Harper refused to come out at first. She stood inside the open doorway, one hand gripping the frame, screaming that she had rights, that they could not do this, that her father knew senators, donors, judges, people who mattered. An agent warned her once, then twice. Finally, Darius, already handcuffed near a vehicle, looked at her and said something that seemed to reach her where orders could not. "Harper, Caleb does not need to see your mugshot on every channel because you made them drag you out." Her face changed at the mention of her son, not into shame, into calculation. She stepped onto the porch with her hands raised, furious and shaking. That was when I arrived. Agent Vale's vehicle came up the drive behind the others and stopped near the edge of the staging area. He helped me out carefully, one hand hovering near my elbow without grabbing me. I was wrapped in a heavy coat, my hair damp from the earlier fog, my face probably pale enough to frighten anyone who cared. But I was standing. That was what mattered. Hours earlier, my family had watched me step onto that mountain road alone. Now they were handcuffed or surrounded on their own driveway, while I stood beside the people they had never believed I would call. Grant saw me first. His expression did something I had never seen before. It opened, not with remorse, with disbelief. I was not where he had left me, and to men like Grant, disobedience was less offensive than survival. Harper saw me next. "You!" she screamed. She lunged so suddenly that one of the agents had to move between us. Another caught her arm and turned her against the side of a vehicle before she got close. She kicked once, slipped in the wet gravel, and shrieked like the humiliation hurt more than the restraint. "You ruined us, you jealous freak! You were always nothing!" I did not move. My daughter shifted under my coat, and I kept my hand over her. "You still think screaming changes facts," I said. Harper twisted harder. "Facts? You set us up!" "No," I said. "I let you speak." Vivian seized the opening. She stepped toward me as far as the agents allowed, her face collapsing into maternal sorrow. "Allison, sweetheart, this has gone too far. You are not well. Pregnancy, grief, all this anger, it is too much for you. Let me help you." For one absurd second, some old injured part of me still wanted that sentence to be real. Let me help you. A daughter should be able to hear those words from her mother without checking for a blade underneath them. But Vivian had used softness as a leash for too long. She reached both hands toward me. I raised one hand. "Do not touch me." The entire driveway seemed to still. Vivian froze, her palms hovering in the space between us. I had never said those words to her with witnesses present. Not once. In our family, refusing touch was treated like violence, while actual harm was called misunderstanding. But that day, with agents watching and cameras from evidence teams recording the scene, Vivian could not rewrite my boundary into cruelty fast enough. Her mouth trembled. "I am your mother. You were my mother when I was 18 and you watched Dad forge my signature." Her face went blank. Harper snapped, "What are you talking about?" I looked at Vivian, not Harper. "Do you want to talk about sacrifice? Let's talk about the college fund." Vivian's tears stopped. I continued because if I did not say it then, I might carry it forever. I told them how I worked 3 jobs in high school, grocery shifts after class, tutoring on weekends, cleaning offices at night when other girls were buying dresses for dances I could not attend. I told them about the account I built one paycheck at a time, the dream school acceptance letter I kept under my pillow, the campus map I memorized because I thought leaving home would save me. I told them how, 2 days before move-in, the account was empty, more than $40,000 gone. Signatures copied, forms filed, money transferred. Grant stared at the gravel. Vivian whispered, "That was different." It bought Harper a convertible. Harper gave a bitter laugh. "I needed a car." Every agent close enough to hear looked at her. She seemed to realize too late what she had admitted, but entitlement had always outrun her intelligence. "For appearances," she added weakly. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly Harper. Even surrounded by federal agents, she still believed appearances were a need. "That was the first time you stole my future," I said. "Today was just the last time you tried." Vivian had no answer. Grant did, but his came as a command. "Stop talking, Allison." I turned toward him. He was cuffed beside a cruiser, rain collecting in his hair, his expensive coat hanging open. He looked smaller without rooms arranged around him. No. That one word did more to him than any speech could have. Agent Vale stepped closer, professional but watchful. "Allie, we need to move forward." I nodded. Then I looked at Darius. He was standing near the second vehicle, cuffed, soaked, and broken in a way that looked less dramatic than Harper's rage, but more permanent. "You signed documents," I said. "You enjoyed the life. You looked away because looking away was comfortable." He nodded, eyes lowered. "I know. I am not here to absolve you." "I know that too." Grant shouted from the cruiser. "Do not say another word." Darius flinched automatically. That old fear still lived in his bones. I recognized it because I had carried my own version for years. I spoke before Grant could keep pulling the leash. Prosecutors are prepared to consider cooperation, not forgiveness. Cooperation. If you have physical ledgers, burner phones, offshore contacts, original passwords, internal emails, anything showing who directed the transfers, now is the time. Vivian snapped. "You vindictive little—" An agent silenced her with a look. Darius's face twisted. "If I talk, he'll destroy me." Grant laughed. "I already own you." I watched Darius absorb that, not as a threat, but as proof. Then I said the one name that mattered more than fear. "Caleb." Darius looked up. "If you take the fall for him, you may miss your son's childhood. If you tell the truth, you might still have a chance to be the kind of father who stops lying before his child learns to do it too." Harper screamed, "Do not use my son!" Darius turned toward her. "Our son." She recoiled like the correction offended her. Grant's voice cut across the driveway. "Keep your mouth shut, Darius." Darius closed his eyes. Rain ran down his face. When he opened them, something had changed. "There's a lockbox." Grant went still. Vivian made a small sound. Darius continued, words rushing now because if he slowed down, fear might catch him. "Primary bedroom, under the rug, loose floorboard near the west wall, waterproof case. Ledgers, burner phones, password cards, 2 USB drives, and printouts of internal instructions. Some emails were never put on the corporate server." Harper turned on him with pure hatred. "You pathetic traitor!" Darius did not look at her. Agents moved immediately. A search team entered the lodge while others kept everyone secured outside. The wait felt longer than it probably was. Rain tapped against coats and car roofs. Grant stared at Darius with a stillness more frightening than shouting. Vivian whispered prayers she had no right to borrow. Harper cried because the world was finally refusing to rearrange itself around her discomfort. Then the agents came back out. One carried a sealed evidence bag containing burner phones. Another carried a waterproof lockbox. Another held cataloged folders, USB drives, password cards, ledgers with names, dates, amounts, initials, and instructions Grant had trusted no digital system to keep safely hidden. Agent Vale looked at me once, and I saw confirmation in his eyes. The smoking gun was real. For the first time that day, I felt something inside me loosen. Not joy. It was too heavy for joy. Relief, maybe. Or the body's first confused attempt to understand that survival had become possible. Grant, sitting in the back of a cruiser now, began to laugh. It started low. Vivian looked toward him sharply. Harper stopped crying. Darius went rigid. I turned. Grant leaned forward as far as the cuffs allowed, rain streaking the window between us, and smiled like a man clinging to the last secret he believed could save him. "You still don't understand how wealth works, Allison," he said. "You haven't touched the real money." Grant's words hung in the rain like a match held over gasoline. You haven't touched the real money. Even handcuffed in the back of a cruiser, soaked, exposed, and surrounded by agents carrying his hidden ledgers out of Black Pine Lodge, my father still believed there was a room somewhere that belonged only to him. That was how Grant Whitmore had survived for so long. He never confused losing one battle with losing the war, because in his mind, money was not just currency. It was insulation. It was oxygen. It was proof that rules were for people who could not afford exceptions. Vivian heard him and lifted her head. Harper stopped struggling. Even Darius looked toward me with fear, because he knew Grant well enough to understand that arrogance was sometimes attached to facts. My father leaned closer to the cruiser window, smiling through rainwater and reflected emergency lights. "You think freezing a few operating accounts scares me?" he said. I walked closer, slowly enough that Agent Vale stayed beside me. "No," I said. "I think losing control scares you." Grant laughed once. "You always did mistake paperwork for power." "That's funny," I said, "because paperwork is exactly how you stole from people." His smile thinned. The agents continued moving around us, cataloging evidence, photographing exterior damage, securing vehicles, and guiding Vivian and Harper farther apart so they could not coordinate stories. The scene was controlled, almost quiet beneath the rain, but Grant's voice tried to make itself the center of everything. It had done that my entire life. It filled rooms, ended arguments, reshaped memory, and turned everyone else into supporting characters. Even then, locked in a cruiser, he tried to narrate the ending. "The important assets are protected," he said. "The suburban house, the vehicles, the reserves, the contingency accounts, the offshore structures. You are playing checkers with people who built the board." Vivian's face saw with sudden hope. "Grant?" He ignored her and kept looking at me. "There is an irrevocable family trust, Allison. Do you know what irrevocable means?" "Yes." "No. You know what books say it means. You do not know what wealth means when it has been built properly. Even if these people posture for cameras, even if some accounts are frozen temporarily, you cannot touch what has been placed beyond reach." Harper wiped rain from her cheeks. "So, we're okay?" No one answered her. Grant's eyes never left mine. "I will hire appellate counsel. I will sue you for defamation. I will bury you in litigation until that insurance money you guarded so carefully is gone. And when your daughter grows up, she will know her mother destroyed her family for attention and still ended up poor." For a moment, everything inside me went still. Not numb, clear. There had been a time when a threat like that would have made me collapse inward, already imagining the cost, the shame, the exhaustion of fighting him. Grant had trained me to fear the second punishment more than the first. If he hurt you and you objected, he made the objection cost more than the wound. That was how he kept people obedient. But I was not 18 anymore. I was not standing over an emptied college account while Vivian told me disappointment built character. I was not sitting at Danny's funeral while my father calculated my vulnerability. I was a mother now, and fear that might have once made me smaller had become something sharper. I looked at Agent Vale. He handed me a folder sealed in a clear evidence sleeve. Grant's expression shifted for the first time. "What is that?" "Paperwork," I said. Darius lowered his head as if he already knew. I opened the folder carefully. The rain had softened into mist, and red and blue lights flashed across the pages. I did not need to read them. I had read them so many times that the structure lived in my memory. Grant's trust had seemed, at first glance, like a locked vault. Assets entered through one door and disappeared behind layers of trustees, holding companies, and dated amendments. The problem was that the vault had been built with stolen money, and stolen money does not become clean because someone gives it a better address. "You created the family trust to look separate from Whitmore Ridge Capital," I said. But investor deposits moved into grant-controlled accounts, then into consulting entities, then into personal reimbursement streams, then into trust contributions. You backdated documents to make some transfers look older than they were. You classified others as management fees. You used forged authorizations to justify movement between related companies. Grant stared at me. Vivian whispered, "No." I continued because simple truth was harder to fight than complicated accusation. The trust was supposed to be a locked vault, but the vault was built from stolen funds. That means investigators do not treat it as protection. They treat it as part of the crime. Grant's face drained. That is not how it works. It is when the trail is verified by federal investigators, tax authorities, and bank records. His mouth opened, but no sound came. "You thought Leonard scrubbed the origins," I said. "Leonard was a real estate attorney. I trace money for a living." Darius closed his eyes. Harper looked from me to Grant, waiting for him to deny it with enough force to make it untrue. Vivian's hand pressed against her throat, not in guilt, but panic. "The mansion is frozen," I said. "The vehicles are impounded or restrained. The investment reserves are locked. The offshore accounts are flagged. Retirement transfers are under review. The trust has already been challenged, and the emergency freeze was signed before you ever made it back to the lodge." Harper took one step backward. "The mansion?" Vivian's voice cracked. "My accounts?" Grant finally recovered enough to snarl. "You had no right." I almost smiled. "That is the first honest thing you've said, because for once, right had nothing to do with what happened to you. Law did." He slammed his shoulder against the cruiser door, making the vehicle rock. "You think you won because you found accounts I expected you to find?" Agent Vale shifted slightly, but Grant did not try anything more. He leaned back, breathing hard, and a new kind of desperation lit his eyes. "Black Pine is not in the family trust." The rain seemed to pause around that sentence. Vivian looked at him sharply. Harper stopped crying again. Darius opened his eyes. Grant smiled with the relief of a man who had found one final locked drawer. "The lodge is held separately through a Nevada company, not the trust, not Whitmore Ridge Capital. Separate ownership, separate structure. You cannot freeze what you cannot connect." That was the moment I understood how much my father loved complexity. He believed if he made something tangled enough, no one would notice the simple knot holding it together. Black Pine Lodge had been separated from the main corporate structure because Grant wanted to shield it from investor claims, tax issues, marital exposure, and anyone who might later question the trust. He had built a private island on paper and forgotten that islands still have shorelines. "You are right," I said. His smile widened. The lodge was separate. Vivian exhaled. Harper made a small sound of relief. I looked up at the dark windows of Black Pine Lodge, at the home my family had used as a stage for power, charity weekends, investor retreats, holiday photographs, and private cruelty. I thought of the wine room, the polished floors, the guest suites no one who needed shelter had ever been invited to use. I thought of Danny's life insurance, the money Grant had tried to steal to save this place. "You separated it so thoroughly," I said, "that you also separated its tax obligations." Grant went still. "For 3 years, the Nevada company failed to keep property taxes current. Not enough to draw attention at first. You delayed, you appealed, you shifted notices to an address no one monitored properly. Then federal freezes began tightening around the related accounts, and the county moved forward." Vivian shook her head. "No, we would have known." "You did know," I said. "There were notices. Darius saw 2 of them." Everyone looked at him. Darius's voice was hoarse. "I brought them to Grant. He said he had it handled." Grant bared his teeth. "You had no authority to discuss that." Darius looked at him through the rain. "And you had no money to pay it." Grant turned back to me. "You are lying. The property went through tax foreclosure. It sold at a distressed auction through the county process. Because the ownership company was separate, your usual attorneys did not catch it fast enough. Because the accounts were already under review, you could not move clean money quickly. And because you thought no one else was watching, you missed the bid that mattered." Harper's voice rose. "What bid?" I reached into the folder and removed the deed transfer summary. "An anonymous Delaware LLC placed the winning bid." Grant's eyes narrowed. "No, I am the sole owner of that LLC." For 1 second, none of them made a sound. Then Harper screamed. Vivian stumbled back against the side of a cruiser. Grant stared at me as if my face had become impossible to understand. "You bought my lodge?" "No," I said. "I bought mine." His breathing became loud. "You used my money." "I used Danny's life insurance, the money you tried to steal to save this place." The words hit him exactly where I wanted them to. Not loud, not dramatic, clean. "You tried to take my daughter's future and use it to keep your monument to theft. Instead, after you lost it, I used that same protected money to buy it legally." Harper was shaking her head so hard her wet hair stuck to her cheeks. "No, this is our home." "It was your stage," I said. "Now it is evidence of what happens when the scapegoat learns how paperwork works." Vivian's composure finally broke, not into grief, but into outrage. "You cannot do this to your family." I turned to her. "You left your pregnant daughter on a mountain road today. That was your father's decision. You watched." Her mouth closed. That was Vivian's true prison, not the one she would later receive from a judge. The truth that, when the moment came to protect her daughter, she had chosen the man with the money over the child who needed her. Again, I turned to the nearest state trooper and handed over the ownership documents. "I would like to make a report," I said. Grant's head snapped up. "For what?" I looked at Black Pine Lodge. "Unauthorized occupation of my private property." Harper barked a laugh that cracked halfway through. "You cannot be serious." "I am." The trooper reviewed the documents, then nodded. I continued. "There is alcohol consumption on the premises, broken property in the foyer, possible damage to the entryway, and mud track through the porch and great room." I did not give Grant Whitmore, Vivian Whitmore, or Harper Whitmore Cole permission to occupy the property. Vivian looked genuinely stunned. You are charging us with trespassing? No, I said. I am reporting it. Let the paperwork decide. Agent Vale looked away for half a second, and I suspected he was hiding the smallest smile. Harper began to unravel then, not with the rage she had used earlier, but with panic. She dropped to her knees in the wet gravel, even with her hands restrained, and looked at me as if I had become the only door left in a burning house. Allie, please, don't do this. I can't go to jail. I can't lose everything. I have Caleb. I have responsibilities. Just let me stay in one of the guest rooms. I'll be quiet. I'll clean. I'll disappear. You won't even know I'm here. I looked at my sister kneeling in the mud where she had once expected me to crawl. I remembered her laughing in the SUV. I remembered my purse landing in the ditch. I remembered the convertible paid for with my stolen college fund. I remembered every birthday where she got celebrated and I got corrected. Every insult dressed as honesty. Every time Vivian told me Harper was fragile and I was strong enough to understand. I reached into my coat pocket and took out a folded piece of paper. It was not evidence. It was an invoice estimate from the cleaning company Agent Vale's team had helped me contact once the ownership transfer was confirmed. I stepped close enough for Harper to see it, then let it fall into the wet gravel beside her. What is that? She whispered. A cleaning bill. Her face went blank. You tracked mud across my porch. The amount was $500. Harper stared at the paper as if it were more humiliating than the handcuffs. Grant began shouting then, but no one was listening to him anymore. Vivian called my name once, then twice. Each time less, like a mother and more like someone trying to summon property that had stopped answering. Agents loaded them into separate vehicles. Darius went willingly. Harper sobbed. Vivian sat rigidly, staring straight ahead. Grant kept his eyes on me until the cruiser door closed between us. As the vehicles began to pull away, I stood in the driveway of the lodge he had lost, with my daughter alive inside me and the deed in my name. I thought that would be the end of it. But 6 months later, my mother still had one last way to remind me why I had been right to walk away. 6 months later, I walked into federal court in Seattle with my daughter sleeping against my chest. Her name was Mara Reed, and she was 2 months old, warm, healthy, and completely unaware that the people waiting inside that courtroom had once left us on a mountain road because they believed fear was stronger than evidence. I had imagined that day many times during the investigation, during the birth, during the sleepless nights when Mara cried and I whispered Danny's name, because grief still found me in the dark. I thought sentencing would feel like a finish line. It did not. It felt quieter than that, heavier, like standing at the edge of a burned house and realizing the fire was out, but the smell would stay in your clothes for years. The courtroom was full, but no one spoke loudly. Reporters sat near the back. Former investors filled several rows, some with folders on their laps, some holding photographs of developments that had never been built, retirement accounts that had vanished, businesses that had closed because they trusted the wrong polished man. Agent Vale sat near the aisle. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marina Sloan stood at the prosecution table, calm and prepared. I sat behind her with Mara against me, feeling the soft weight of my daughter's breathing and the strange ache of knowing Danny should have been there, holding my hand under the bench. When my family entered, I almost did not recognize them. Grant came first. No tailored suit, no gold watch, no confident stride. He looked older, hollowed out, like power had been a room he rented and someone had finally changed the locks. Vivian followed with her hair pulled back plainly, No pearls, no soft charity luncheon glow. Still, she kept her chin lifted, trying to look wounded instead of convicted. Harper walked behind her, thinner, furious, and terrified. She kept scanning the room as if she expected someone important to stand up and say there had been a mistake. Darius entered last. He looked ashamed. That mattered less than truth, but more than nothing. The judge began with the fraud. He spoke about the scale of it, the layered companies, the false valuations, the investor money used to pay earlier investors, the luxury expenses disguised as business needs, the forged documents, the hidden ledgers, and the deliberate pressure placed on me after Danny's death. He did not speak dramatically. He did not need to. The facts sounded brutal without decoration. When he mentioned that I had been pregnant when Grant tried to coerce me into signing away protected funds, Vivian looked down. Grant did not. Darius was sentenced first because he had cooperated early, surrendered evidence, testified, and helped prosecutors recover assets. He avoided prison. He received 5 years of supervised probation, a lifetime ban from working in finance, mandatory ethics and financial crime counseling, and a continuing obligation to assist with restitution. Harper made a sound of disgust when she heard it, but Darius did not look at her. He looked at the floor, then once toward the row where his son Caleb sat with Darius's sister. I did not forgive him. Forgiveness is not a prize people earn by becoming useful. But I accepted that his choice helped stop the bleeding. Grant stood next. His attorney tried to paint him as a respected businessman who lost control during a difficult market. The judge listened without expression. Then Grant spoke for himself. And even after everything, he still could not find remorse. He talked about pressure, misunderstanding, market forces, disloyalty, and my emotional instability. He said I had been manipulated by federal agents while grieving. He said families should handle disagreements privately. The judge let him speak just long enough for everyone to hear the emptiness. Then the judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. For a man his age, that sentence was not a pause. It was the rest of the road. Vivian's attorney argued that she had been a wife following her husband's lead, a mother overwhelmed by tragedy, a woman who did not understand the financial machinery around her. The judge rejected that before the sentence even came. He described her role in laundering funds, pressuring victims, managing appearances, and weaponizing motherhood to silence me. Vivian cried then, but I had seen those tears too many times to trust them. She received 10 years. Harper received 7. Her refusal to cooperate, her perjury during pretrial proceedings, her attempt to attack me at Black Pine Lodge, and her recorded cruelty on the mountain road all followed her into sentencing. When the judge spoke about entitlement, lack of remorse, and contempt for victims, Harper shook her head like the room itself was being unfair. "I don't belong with criminals," she shouted. The judge looked at her for a long second. "That is no longer your decision." When deputies moved toward her, Harper screamed my name. Mara stirred against my chest, and I wrapped my arms around her before she could wake fully. That was the moment I realized my daughter would never learn to flinch at Harper's voice. She would never be told to make herself smaller so someone else could feel special. She would never be handed into that family as a second chance for people who had destroyed their first one. After the hearing, people began to leave in quiet waves. Investors spoke softly with prosecutors. Reporters hurried into the hall. Darius was taken aside to complete paperwork. Grant was removed without looking back, which was his final performance of control. Harper sobbed until the door closed behind her. Vivian stayed near the defense table, speaking urgently to a bailiff. I knew before anyone told me that she was asking for me. Agent Vale approached. You do not have to. I know. And I did know. That was what made the choice different. For most of my life, I mistook obligation for love. That day, I understood I could walk away and still be whole. But there was one last question I needed answered, even if I already suspected the truth. I needed to know whether my mother, facing 10 years in prison, after everything exposed in court, after hearing how clearly the judge named what she had done, could find one sentence that sounded like remorse. So I walked toward her, stopping several feet away with Mara held close. Vivian looked at the baby first. Her face softened in a way that hurt because I wanted it to be real. She's beautiful, she whispered. She looks like Daniel around the eyes. I said nothing. She should know her grandmother. No. Vivian flinched as if I had slapped her. Allison, do not punish a child for adult mistakes. I looked at her then. Really looked. Prison had stripped away the pearls, the silk, the perfect lighting, but not the entitlement. It was still there beneath the trembling mouth and wet eyes. She still believed motherhood was a title that survived anything. What do you want, Vivian? The warmth disappeared so quickly I almost smiled. She glanced toward the bailiff, then lowered her voice. Harper is fragile. I waited. She is not like you. She cannot handle hard things. You have always been stronger. You know that. There it was. The old hook. You are strong enough to suffer, so suffer quietly. Harper is fragile enough to be cruel, so forgive her quickly, Vivian continued. The government took everything. Her accounts are frozen. She will not have anyone to help her inside. I need you to put money into her commissary account. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. Mara made a tiny sound against my chest. Vivian leaned closer. It does not have to be much. You have money, you have the insurance, you have the lodge. You won. Surely you can be gracious. I stared at the woman who had given birth to me and wondered how many years I had wasted searching for a mother inside her. You want me to fund Harper's prison account? She is your sister. She left me pregnant on a mountain road. Your father made that decision. Harper threw my purse into the mud. She was upset. You watched. Vivian's mouth tightened. I made mistakes. No, I said. You made choices. Her eyes filled again. Blood still means something. I shifted Mara higher against my chest. My daughter slept through it, peaceful and safe, her tiny fist curled against my coat. Blood explains how I got here, I said. It does not give you ownership of me. Vivian's face hardened. So, this is who you are now? Cruel, cold, turning your back on your own family? I had imagined that accusation would hurt more. Instead, it sounded old, rehearsed, almost boring. Family does not leave a pregnant widow in the woods. Family does not steal a child's education fund. Family does not forge signatures, mock grief, threaten children, or use love as a leash. You keep using the word family because it is the only costume your control has left. She began crying harder. I am your mother. You stopped being my mother on that mountain road. Her lips parted. I am not abandoning you now, I said. I am refusing to follow you into the cage you built for yourself. For one brief moment, I thought she might apologize. Her face shifted, and something almost human passed through her eyes. Then she whispered, Harper really does need the money. That was the answer. Not the one I wanted, but the one I needed. The bailiff stepped forward. Vivian turned as they guided her away, and the mask fell completely. "You selfish girl," she cried. "You always wanted to destroy us." I held Mara close and did not turn around. The holding door closed behind my mother with a heavy metal sound that echoed once through the hall. For the first time in my life, silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like space. Outside the courthouse, rain had stopped. The pavement shone under a pale sky, and the air smelled clean in the way cities do after storms. Not untouched, but rinsed. I stood on the steps with my daughter in my arms and realized something I had been too afraid to say before. Losing my entire family did not feel like falling. It felt like being set down somewhere safe. The first time I drove back to Black Pine Lodge after sentencing, Mara was asleep in the back seat, wrapped in a yellow blanket Danny had picked out before she was born. I drove myself. That mattered more than I expected. No one had ordered me into the passenger seat. No one had locked the doors. No one had taken my phone, watched my face in the mirror, or waited for the old fear to make me obedient. The mountain road curved through the trees just as it had that day, damp and narrow, with fog caught low between the pines. For a while, my hands tightened on the steering wheel every time gravel shifted under the tires. The body remembers places before the mind decides what they mean. Then I reached the stretch of road where they had left me. I slowed down. I did not stop. That was important. For months, people asked if I wanted to visit the exact spot, stand there, reclaim it, turn it into some symbolic moment of triumph. Maybe that works for some people. For me, stopping would have made that road important in a way it no longer deserved. I had already survived it. I had already told the truth about it. I had already watched the people who abandoned me answer for what they did. So, I drove past the ditch where Harper had thrown my purse, past the trees that had witnessed what my family tried to deny, and kept going toward a house that no longer belonged to them. Black Pine Lodge looked different before I even reached the front door. The gate was open now, not guarded by a keypad. Grant changed whenever he wanted to remind people who controlled access. The driveway had been repaired. The landscaping was simpler. The heavy bronze letters bearing the Black Pine name had been removed from the stone entrance. For a few months after the arrest, I considered selling the property and using the money to disappear somewhere warm, quiet, and far from every road that reminded me of them. No one would have blamed me. Agent Vale even told me that walking away from a battlefield is not the same as losing it. But every time I looked at the lodge, I thought of Danny. Danny had spent his life entering places. Other people were trying to escape, not because he loved danger, but because he believed shelter meant nothing, if only the powerful could reach it. He used to say, the worst part of rescue work was how often people apologized for needing help. Fire victims apologized for the mess. Car accident victims apologized for bleeding. Domestic violence victims apologized for calling too late. He hated that. He hated how shame followed people into emergencies like a second injury. So I decided Black Pine Lodge would stop being a monument to Grant Whitmore and become a place where shame was not allowed to make the rules. The renovations took months. The wine room was emptied first. I remember standing inside it, surrounded by dark racks and climate controls built to protect bottles worth more than some families' rent, and feeling no sadness at all when the contractors began tearing it out. That space became a small counseling room with soft chairs, warm lamps, and a window facing the trees. The formal dining room, where investors had once been flattered into trust, became a workshop space with long tables, whiteboards, laptops, and folders labeled with words I wished I had understood sooner: credit freeze, document trail, coercive control, financial safety plan. The guest suites became temporary housing rooms. The office where Grant hid records became a legal aid consultation room. The great room, with its towering windows and stone fireplace, became a common area where people could sit without being expected to perform gratitude. I renamed it the Reed House Recovery Center, not after me, after Danny. His photograph hangs in the entry hall now. Not the official department portrait, though I have that too. I chose a picture from our backyard, taken on a day he was painting the nursery and had somehow gotten more paint on his shirt than on the wall. He was laughing at something I said, head tilted back, one hand lifted like he was trying to defend himself from the camera. Beside the photo is a small plaque for the people who choose to protect instead of possess. The first week we opened, only 3 people came. One was a woman whose brother had drained their mother's accounts and blamed her for noticing. One was a young man whose parents had taken credit cards out in his name before he turned 18. One was a grandmother whose adult son kept threatening to cut off access to her grandchildren unless she signed over her house. They all walked in with the same look I recognized from my own mirror. Embarrassment, exhaustion, suspicion, and the deep fear that maybe asking for help made them disloyal. I told them what I wish someone had told me. "You are not crazy for noticing what happened to you," the woman cried first, then the grandmother, then the young man looked at the floor so hard I knew he was trying not to. Financial abuse sounds clean when you say it quickly, like a category, like something that belongs in a brochure. But it is not clean when you are inside it. It is your father saying he needs your signature, because family trusts family. It is your mother calling you selfish for asking where your money went. It is a sister laughing because she got the car your future paid for. It is a spouse, a sibling, a child, or a parent turning love into paperwork and paperwork into a cage. It is being told that protecting yourself is betrayal, while the people draining you call their theft sacrifice. At Reed House, we started with basics: credit repair guidance, fraud documentation support, financial literacy classes, emergency housing, referrals to attorneys who understood family coercion, support groups for people who had been told their boundaries were cruelty, counseling for people grieving relatives who were still alive. That last part mattered most to me. Estrangement is a strange grief. You are mourning the family you lost and the family you never had at the same time. People expect death to make you sad. They do not always understand that freedom can make you sad too. Sometimes after sessions ended and the house went quiet, I walked through the halls with Mara on my hip and told her little pieces of the story in a voice too soft for anyone else to hear. Not the ugly details, not yet, just the truth that belonged to her. This is where your grandfather tried to keep his secrets. This is where your father's love built something better. This is where we learned that being safe matters more than being approved of. Mara never answered, of course. She just looked at the lights, grabbed my hair, or pressed her cheek against my shoulder. But every time I held her in that house, I felt the cycle ending in small, ordinary ways. She would never be taught that love had to be earned through obedience. She would never be told that giving people access to her body, money, time, or peace was the price of being called good. She would never be handed to Vivian as a reward for surviving prison. She would never be asked to comfort Harper's consequences. If Mara one day wanted to know the Whitmore side of her bloodline, I would tell her the truth without poison and without pretending. But I would never let those people build a doorway back into our lives. The legal process continued long after sentencing. Restitution moved slowly. Investors recovered pieces, not wholes. Assets sold. Appeals were filed and denied. Reporters called less often. My father wrote 2 letters from prison. I did not open the first one for 3 weeks. When I finally did, it contained no apology, only accusations arranged in paragraphs. The second stayed unopened in a drawer, until I asked my attorney to return all future correspondence. Vivian sent one card on Mara's first birthday with a drawing of a lamb and the words, "A grandmother's love is forever." I threw it away unopened after photographing it for the file. Harper never wrote to me. That might be the kindest thing she ever did. People sometimes ask whether revenge felt good. I understand why. Stories like mine are supposed to end with satisfaction, with the villains dragged away and the survivor standing in triumph. Some moments were satisfying. I will not pretend otherwise. Watching Grant lose the lodge mattered. Hearing Vivian ask me for Harper's commissary money told me the truth more clearly than any confession could. Seeing Harper kneel in the mud beside a cleaning bill was petty, and yes, some wounded part of me needed that. But revenge did not give me back my childhood. It did not give me the college years they stole. It did not bring Danny home. It did not create the mother I begged for in every version of my life. It did not make Grant admit he had been a predator in a tailored suit. It did not turn Harper into someone capable of remorse. It did not erase the moment on the mountain road when, for 10 seconds, I believed I might still be the helpless girl they raised. What it gave me was room. Room to breathe without waiting for the next demand. Room to raise my daughter without teaching her fear as a family tradition. Room to build something useful from the wreckage, instead of spending the rest of my life guarding the ashes. That was not the revenge I imagined when I first handed documents to Agent Vale. It was better, quieter, stronger, less about watching them fall and more about realizing I no longer had to fall with them. One afternoon, almost a year after the raid, I stood on the back lawn of Reed House while Mara sat on a blanket in the grass, clapping at nothing but sunlight. The pines moved in the wind. The lodge behind us was full of voices, not polished laughter or investor charm, but real voices, people comparing notes, people asking questions, people realizing they were allowed to leave. I looked toward the trees beyond the drive and thought about the road where my family had abandoned me because they believed I was weak. They forgot something important. Seeds are buried before they grow. If you have ever been the scapegoat in a family, then you already know the hardest part is not always what they do to you. Sometimes the hardest part is how calmly everyone expects you to accept it. They take your money and call it need. They cross your boundaries and call it love. They punish your refusal and call it discipline. Then, when you finally say no, they look at you like you are the one who broke the family. For years, I believed my healing depended on their honesty. I thought I needed my father to admit he stole from me. I thought I needed my mother to say she saw what happened and chose not to protect me. I thought I needed Harper to understand that my pain was never competition for her comfort. I thought closure would come when they finally looked at me and said, "We were wrong." But some people would rather lose everything than tell the truth about what they took. That was the lesson I learned after the arrests, after the trial, after the sentencing, after the letters I did not answer and the apologies that never came. Closure did not arrive as a confession. It did not sound like my mother crying in a courtroom or my father begging for forgiveness. It came in quieter ways, a changed phone number, a locked gate, a deed in my name. My daughter sleeping peacefully in a home no one toxic could enter. Sometimes closure is not someone else finally understanding your pain. Sometimes closure is deciding they no longer get access to it. So, if you are listening to this while carrying a story no one in your family wants told, I need you to hear me clearly. You are not selfish for protecting your finances. You are not cruel for protecting your children. You are not ungrateful because you noticed the theft. You are not dramatic because you remembered the truth. And you are not broken just because abusive people called your boundaries disrespectful. Toxic families love beautiful words: loyalty, gratitude, blood, respect, sacrifice, tradition. But beautiful words can become chains when the wrong people use them. Loyalty without safety is control. Gratitude without consent is debt. Blood without love is just biology. Respect demanded through fear is not respect at all. I used to think walking away meant I had failed to keep my family together. Now I know I was never holding a family together. I was holding together a system that survived by keeping me small. The day they left me on that mountain road, they thought they were teaching me what happened when I stopped obeying. Instead, they taught me the last lesson I ever needed from them. They taught me that being abandoned by the wrong people can become the beginning of your freedom. My daughter will grow up knowing Danny's name, not as a tragedy, but as love. She will grow up in a place built from truth instead of fear. She will know that family is not proven by shared blood, public photographs, or last names carved into stone. Family is proven by protection, by honesty, by the people who hold your hand without reaching for your wallet, by the people who choose your safety when control would be easier. And if you have ever had to walk away from people who use the word family to control you, tell me where you found the strength to do it. If you are still trying to find that strength, I hope this story reminds you that your peace is worth protecting. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that blood does not give anyone the right to destroy you.